Hi everyone, welcome along to the final paper exam practice course ahead of your paper 3 exam on Thursday. Thank you very much for all of you that have sent in questions as always and topics, and I will try as always to get through as much as I possibly can. If you are watching this on TikTok, I very much recommend that you switch over to YouTube because on YouTube you'll be able to see me drawing diagrams, and my phone didn't survive the last two times, so I don't know whether it will survive again this time, but we'll do our best. Right, let's get started. I know that you guys are probably dying for me to begin with 25 markers, and I promise we will get through as many 25 markers as we possibly can by the end of the session. But I actually think that the 25 marker in paper 3, and especially by the end of this, you will realize is the easiest question in the paper. The harder parts of this paper is perfecting your timing for the 5, 8, and 12s, yeah? And in particular, it is the 8 marker. The 8 marker I bang on about as the killer question. And there is a good reason why, because often kids overwrite and then they end up with no time at all to be able to do the 12 and 25 markers, yeah? So let's start with a very typical 8 marker that they've asked quite a few times in just slightly different variations. So I want to begin with June 2019, paper 3. Let's go. So June 2019, paper 3, question 2b has the following 8 marker. It says, examine two reasons, apart from access to finance, why 90% of the manufacturing sector in Mozambique is made up of small enterprises. Right. They often do this where they throw in terminology to try and confuse you. But remember, they're not allowed to ask anything beyond the scope of your spec. And therefore, when they say 90% made up of small enterprises, what does that just mean? What it basically just means is that it's made up of really small firms. So another way to interpret this question is, why are firms struggling to grow in this economy? Why is there a lack of big like monopolies or oligopolies in the market? Yeah. So let's just do some revision very quickly because you'll see this question comes up quite a few times in other papers as well. Well, I want to just whiz through a variety of reasons that explain why a firm might be small, whether it's in a developing country or a developed world. And that way, your frame of mind is to look for these things in an extract, and you'll find it far easier to find them. So let's just whiz through a few things, yeah? One, do you guys agree that in order for you to grow, realistically, you need quite a lot of money, right? To be able to advertise, to be able to innovate, to be able to sell your goods on a kind of mass basis. So, in other words, if you've got low profitability inhibits your ability to grow. Okay, so what would cause profits to go down? Well, a lack of demand. If there's a lack of demand for your goods, either domestically or overseas, that would help explain why your firm may be small. One. Number two is the cost. If the costs are really high, then realistically you're struggling to scale up and grow your business. That could be two. Number three is if the barriers to entry into the market are generally quite low. If something has happened that allows multiple firms to come into this market, well, then again, it's going to be made up of loads of firms. No one can really dominate. Number four, and I would want to show you guys this actually on a diagram. Number four is a concept which I've gone through in previous papers. It's called the MES, right? The minimum efficient scale. Essentially, the minimum amount of output that is required for a firm to be able to fully tap into its economies of scale. Right, let me try to connect my board. My technology, as always, is failing me, but we will try. Otherwise, I can just explain it in words while I wait for it to try and connect. But in a nutshell, the way that it works is as follows. Is if I look at certain industries, if I compare, let's say, the car manufacturing sector to, let's say, I don't know, the hairdressing industry. Do you guys agree that the car manufacturing sector, there are far larger economies of scale that you can tap into? So, for example, the existing firms in the market like Toyota, like Nissan, when they bulk buy their raw materials, do we agree that they're bulk buying in crazy volume? Like the quantity of what they're bulk buying is so large that realistically, to enter that market, you need to be able to bulk buy like they can. Are many firms in a position where they are capable of bulk buying in the same way that Nissan and Toyota bulk buy? Well, the answer obviously is not at all, right? They need enormous amounts of money, they need enormous amounts of output, huge amount of market share, basically, right? That therefore is a market that is probably made up by a few big firms. Whereas if I look at, let's say, the hairdressing industry, well, think about what the barriers to entry are and whether there are large economies of scale. Well, not really, because the things that they're bulk buying, maybe like, I don't know, shampoo bottles in maybe like 20, 30 units at a time. Is that a significant level of output required? No, not really. We could bulk buy that amount of shampoo and we can enter that market. In other words, the barriers to entry into the market are low because the MES is easier to reach. And that helps explain why there might be multiple firms in the market. Yeah? Right. My board is being really annoying, so I'm going to try and connect in a second. In the meantime, let's actually look at some of the things over here. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Just the last one is if productivity levels are low. If productivity levels are low, that will also mean that your costs are high and therefore you are not competitive on a global basis. And if you're not competitive on a global basis, you are struggling to be able to grow and sell your good on a kind of international basis. Yeah. Okay, let's have a look very briefly at some of the things on the extract. Yeah. So we look at the extract over here. Just to save time, you guys, of course, can watch this back later and in your own time do it properly. But it talks about a few kind of issues that Mozambique face. Yeah. One of the most important ones that are easy to spot straight away is this. Traditional export earnings dropped due to depressed global demand. Okay. It is so vital that you guys understand how eight markers are constructed and marked because if you overwrite, you will run out of time. So I want to actually write a model paragraph with you guys to show you how easy it is to get the 3 marks of analysis immediately. Yeah. So it would basically be one knowledge mark, one application mark, and one analysis. Yeah. Okay, let's do it straight away. Yeah. So it would read something like this. One reason why firms in the manufacturing sector in Mozambique are small is because of a lack of demand or due to low revenue, something like that. That would be your topic sentence. Yeah, that would be the knowledge mark. So that's 1 mark, just that one sentence. What do I instantly want you guys to do? As soon as you've said your topic sentence, you should now turn around and give them a quote from the extract. Get your application mark immediately. Well, what is the application mark here? Well, the application mark is simply this, is that according to extract E, and then open quote, traditional export earnings dropped due to depressed global demand. That is your second mark. How easy was that? That shouldn't take 2 minutes. Then the third thing is to explain it in as few sentences as possible. And I want you to understand the importance of not dragging this out. It is not subjective. It is a single mark, and it's just your ability to explain the concept. So it'll be something like this, is that weak demand overseas is likely to result in low revenue for firms in Mozambique, and thus profits are likely to be low. Given this, these firms are likely to remain small. That's it. That's it. That's literally the 3 marks that you needed to get the first paragraph done. Now you need to repeat that a second time, yeah? So just again to show you guys what the answer is. Well, it says that there is large scale emigration, especially of skilled workers. Okay. Firstly, what is emigration? Emigration is the opposite of immigration. Emigration is where workers are leaving the economy. Yeah. And it says specifically that it's the high skilled workers that are leaving the economy. Big problem. Why? Because it means those that are left in the economy are obviously low skilled, right? So we go, another reason why manufacturing firms may be small is due to low productivity. That is my knowledge mark. How easy is that? Immediately, I give them the application. I go, according to extract E, open quote, large scale emigration, especially of skilled workers. Yeah, or I'd say something like, according to extract E, the Mozambique economy is characterized by bang. Yeah, that's my quote. And then what do I do? I need to explain it. I need to explain it in simple terms. And the way I explain it in simple terms is to say that given this, productivity levels in the economy are likely to be low, meaning that firms' costs are likely to be high. Given this, these firms are likely to be uncompetitive on a global basis and struggle to grow. That's it. Easy as that. Yeah. I know there were alternative explanations that you could have gone from the extract. Those are two simple explanations. That should not take 6 minutes if you perfect your technique. Yeah. Right. There are 2 marks of evaluation. What do I need you to do for the evaluation? Well, I need you to just give me 1 point and I need you to just explain the point. I don't want you to give me 2 points. Yeah. And whenever we're dealing with why firms are small or why they're struggling to grow, a really easy evaluation is to talk about kind of in the long run, how maybe the situation might change. It might be that actually they start to grow in the long run. And the easy point to flag up here is the last sentence over here. So over this paragraph, it says that their currency, the metical, I might be butchering the pronunciation, I can't lie to you guys. It's basically depreciated to a new low of 100 meticals to £1. What does that mean? Well, it basically means that they're going to become more price competitive. So maybe they are able to start growing by exporting more and selling more in the global market. So the way you'd word it is this, you do the line and go, however, some firms in the manufacturing sector may be able to grow in the future. This is because, according to Extract E, give me another application. I know there's a limit of 2, but just apply wherever you can. According to Extract E, the Mozambican currency, or Mozambican, I don't know, yeah, the currency has depreciated to an all-time low or a new low of 100 meticals to £1. Just one more sentence, yeah? Which is to say that this would make these firms more internationally price competitive and thus their export earnings could rise, allowing them to grow. Does that make sense? Yeah? That is literally the entire 8 marks. That did not take, hopefully, in an exam, doesn't take you 8 minutes. Yeah? You have a limit of 8 minutes. Yeah, you're not allowed to exceed 8 minutes. No matter what you do, do not exceed 8 minutes. Just move on if you haven't finished whatever you needed to finish. Yeah. So that's the first question that I wanted to show you guys. Right, I want to show you another 8 marker to just show you how repetitive these questions typically are. And then we'll start doing some 25s. If my board would start working, that would really help the situation, but it's being very annoying. But anyways, right. I'm going to take you guys to November, to June 2023 now, paper three. Okay. So June 2023, paper three. And the question is to be, to be or not to be. Okay. It says, examine two reasons why retailers on the high street tend to remain small. Yeah. So, in a nutshell, you want to find again reasons why firms are struggling to grow. Why is it that they're still pretty small firms and they haven't expanded beyond whatever their size is at the moment? Yeah. So, remember the list that I went through a second ago? Well, anything that results in like lower barriers to entry, that would translate in new firms entering the market, and therefore the market is made up of smaller firms now. Number one, forget the extract. The extract does talk about this, but I just want to show you guys that you can actually work out the answer pretty much without reading the data. You have to obviously read the data, you have to apply it to the data. But number one is, do you guys agree that there has been an increasing trend towards online shopping? Why is that going to make firms small? The reason why it's going to make firms small is because it increases competition. The barriers to entry into the market are far lower. Think about what you would have needed before. You needed, like, for example, like massive amounts of rent, where, like, let's say you have like a shop in Oxford Street, and in order for you to therefore rent, you need to pay huge amounts of money, right? But now you don't need a massive, like, you don't have to get a shop. You can just have like an online presence like ASOS, I don't know, Net-a-Porter, etc. And that allows firms to enter the market more easily. So that is number one. That's the reason why firms may be small. They're struggling, basically. Number two, do you guys agree that before, to be able to get people to know about your product, to be able to get your name out there, you needed to advertise, right? But now advertising is far cheaper. Why is it far cheaper? Because of social media. You can put out something on TikTok and who knows, you might go viral, right? In other words, you don't have to spend large sums of money on an advertising campaign because you've got platforms like TikTok and Instagram and social media where you can get massive exposure straight away. Again, the barriers to entry then into the market have gone down. Cool? That is the kind of analysis that you would do. The evaluation is that, yeah, but there are some firms that are doing pretty well, like Zara, for example, who would be able to respond to changes in the market. For example, like they're able to provide like a really good website because they've got the financial means to do so, right? They can still market and on social media and grow compared to like a smaller firm. Yeah. Okay, so that is that 8 marker. Yeah. One last one. It's actually a 12, just to show you this topic comes up a lot. And then we will go on to do something else. Okay, 12 marker. With reference to figure 2 and extract B, discuss the possible constraints on business growth for firms supplying energy to households in the UK. Okay? Okay. So again, what are we looking for? We're looking for reasons why the barriers to entry may have gone down because that would allow new firms to enter the market. We're looking for anything that results in like their costs going up and therefore their profits are going down. That prohibits them from growing and like it stops them from becoming too big a firm. Yeah. And we can notice that basically in the very first paragraph. Yeah. So it was extract B, wasn't it? Yeah. Okay. Here we go. The government responded to anger over high energy bills with further liberalization. Okay. And then it talks about some of the new entrants were innovative, such as Bulb, which offered consumption tracking apps, and Octopus, which discouraged consumption when demand was high with dynamic pricing. Right. What does that mean? There's clearly evidence of entry. So if there are firms entering the market, that would mean that the market share of the firms already in the market is starting to get saturated. It's starting to basically, they have less market share, basically. Yeah. They have fewer customers now. Yeah. Because it's being divided up by more firms. The other part of the extract talks about how a lot of these firms started to encounter potential losses because the wholesale price of gas paid by UK energy firms had risen by about 70%, but they weren't able to raise their prices to household by more than 54%. What does that mean? That would basically mean that their profitability is starting to go down, and as a result, they don't have the money to be able to grow and expand and dominate the market, if you like. Yeah? That is the two analysis points that you need to basically explain and develop in that answer. The very last thing is, how do I evaluate this? Well, the way that I would evaluate it is to talk about in the long run, it could again start to be dominated by one or two firms, yeah? Or like the big six, really, that's what they call them, yeah? And the logic of why is because in the extract, it spoke about how the new firms were ill-equipped to basically like deal with the new market, yeah? Here we are. This is it, yeah? It says business models that left them ill prepared to achieve. So here we go. During the last decade, the government has allowed new entrants into the retail energy market with business models that left them ill prepared to achieve long-term business growth. In other words, a lot of these firms may end up what? Shutting down. And if these firms shut down, that will therefore translate in the market being dominated by a few big firms who survive, the big six, basically. Yeah? In other words, it may be that they start to grow back to their original size. Yeah. Okay, right. Hopefully that was relatively straightforward and made sense. I'm still having trouble trying to connect my board, which is very annoying. I'm gonna just give me 1 second to try one more time. Otherwise, I'll start doing it out loud, but I do want my board to be able to draw diagrams for you guys. So give me a sec. In the meantime, I have made up a 25 marker for us to start with, and it is actually based on the 2018 paper 2 question. It is a 12 marker. I'm going to convert it into a 25 marker and do it as micro and macro. So a couple of things to discuss before I actually hopefully get my board to work. There are a couple of misconceptions about paper 3 that I want to address. Firstly, it is not the case that one section of the exam is all micro and one section is all macro. That's a myth. That's not true. The 5, 8s, and 12s, you don't need to mix micro and macro. You can, you just don't need to. So as you saw, for example, in the markers that I just did, they were all micro. I dealt with it purely through micro. I didn't really bring in any macro. Yeah. The 25 marker is the only question where you are expected to do both micro and macro. And what they mean by that is that you have one dedicated and detailed analysis to micro and one dedicated and detailed analysis to macro. But, common myth, you do not need to evaluate micro with micro. You can evaluate micro with macro, and similarly the other one as well. In other words, you could have like an essay where it's really detailed micro paragraph, evaluated with macro, really detailed macro paragraph, and again evaluated with macro. It's completely fine. Yeah, that is totally okay. The only expectation they have is that you definitely will do one paragraph on micro analysis and one paragraph of macro analysis, and then you're done. Yeah. Right. Okay. I think the reason why my thing is not connecting is because my phone is on TikTok and I'm trying to stream from my phone, and it's not letting me. So TikTok people, I apologize in advance. I mean, last time it disconnected anyway. If you could please transfer over to YouTube, if you could tell people as well, that would be great. I'm going to disconnect my TikTok. In the meantime, I'm going to pull up paper 2 to show you guys the extract that kind of what it would look like while I finally get my board to hopefully work. And here is the question. The question that I'd like you guys to write down is this. Evaluate microeconomic and macroeconomic policies that could be used to combat the issues of globalization in the UK. Okay? So the question again is evaluate microeconomic and macroeconomic policies that could be used to combat the issues associated with globalization. Yeah? If you see, by the way, they have it as a 12 marker over here. It says, with reference to extract A, discuss two macroeconomic policies, apart from protectionism, we can use protectionism, that a government could use to reduce the negative effects of globalization. Right, TikTok people, I'll see you on YouTube. Let's disconnect TikTok and let's try and get my phone to actually work over here. Right. Okay, so really quickly, let's have the extract up. You guys are welcome to start reading the extract while I quickly just get this connected and get us moving. Very annoying. Personal hotspot. Okay. Wi-Fi settings. Okay. So the first thing I want us to do is I want us to basically go through a variety of things that globalization has resulted in that are negative. Yeah. And especially through the lens of the UK, but we can think of it in terms of developing countries as well in the event that it's asked about developing countries. Yeah. So the first bad thing about globalization is that it's resulted in countries becoming too interdependent. Do you guys agree that countries are so interconnected now that one country mismanaging its economic affair will negatively impact other countries, especially their main trading partners? So, for example, the financial crash in 2008 spills over and affects the entire globe, right? So that's number one. Number two, if you think about it in terms of sectors in the UK like manufacturing, well, a lot of manufacturing firms have outsourced their production process to other parts of the world, like Bangladesh, like Thailand, like Vietnam. Why? Why is it the case that they've done that? Well, it's obviously far cheaper to employ workers in those countries than it is to employ workers here where there's like a minimum wage, right? So what does that resulted in? Well, it's resulted in structural unemployment. Those individuals in the manufacturing sector that had a job no longer have a job because their job is now transferred over to somewhere else in the world. My board is working, right? We're back in action. Yeah. And number three, let's get the board up. Number three, another bad thing about globalization is the fact that it's resulted in higher levels of income inequality within countries. So the drive towards capitalism, throwback to paper two, right? That would result in inequality widening within economies. And then last one I want to go through here is the fact that your firms have struggled to compete against TNCs. Domestic, especially smaller firms in the UK and around the world, aren't able to compete with large TNCs. And so these are the issues that we're dealing with. Let's fix them. And I want to show how easy this is. In the 25 marker, when you do the micro point, I need you guys to understand that if you get to a point where you are shifting the cost and revenue diagram, give yourself a big pat on the back. You are smashing life. That is how you smash the 25 marker. We are repeatedly, and you'll see this over and over again. There are a couple of exceptions, but we are repeatedly going to be drawing negative externalities or positive, sorry, cost and revenue diagrams and shifting cost curves or AR curves, MR curves. Yeah. Right. So let's go. This is how we are going to deal with this question. Add page. Right. From a macro perspective, do you guys agree that the individuals who have lost their jobs because of the fact that it's been outsourced to other parts of the world and they're structurally unemployed, what can I do? Well, I can obviously provide them with education and training. So I say to myself, all right, education and training is clearly the solution to this problem. Why? Number one, the first thing that it does is that it equips individuals with skills that are more relevant to the economy so it can help resolve structural unemployment. That's one. Number two, the second benefit of education and training is that it increases their bargaining power. Those workers who now have higher skills, they are able to negotiate higher salaries because their demand is more wage inelastic. Now, I know some of you are like, oh my God, he's doing the macro paragraph and there's micro involved. It's okay. Calm down. You can mix them together as long as the overarching point in the paragraph and the main focus of the paragraph is macro, you're good. You will mix them and I want you to mix them. That's perfectly okay. So when I say things like, their demand becomes more wage inelastic, that's just adding to the point to say that they can increase their bargaining power. Now, there's two things that happen here. Not only do these people get jobs, it actually fixes another issue simultaneously. Which issue does it fix? Well, by increasing their bargaining power and their wages, it reduces income inequality, which is another byproduct of globalization. And now that income inequality has gone down, we can show off a little bit. How do we show off? We draw a Lorenz curve. And we draw the Lorenz curve shifting in. Let's draw the Lorenz curve. So the overarching point, by the way, would be this. It will be one macroeconomic policy that could be used to combat the issues of globalization would be investment into education and training programs. Yeah, that would be the topic sentence. You then use the extract or your own knowledge and identify what the problem is. So you would say something like, globalization has resulted in high levels of structural unemployment in the UK, as many jobs have been outsourced to developing countries where wages are far lower. It has also resulted in higher levels of income inequality within the economy. Okay, we then talk about how education fixes that, and then we get to this point. Some of you may have drawn this quite a few times in paper two. Good old Lorenz. Right. As you know, cumulative share of income on the y-axis, you know it from previous lives. Why? Because income starts with the letter I. And this axis, it's an I. Wow. Yeah, and then cumulative share of population. Okay. So cumulative share of population over here. I'm being lazy, I'm gonna write pop. Yeah, right. First things first, we draw the 45-degree line, the line of absolute equality. Yeah. And then we have our curve like this, and we're shifting it inwards. Why? Because inequality is going to reduce when these people have more bargaining power. Yeah. Shift it in, and you're just going to talk about the Gini coefficient going down. Yeah. The Gini coefficient decreases. What a paragraph, by the way. That clearly illustrates that you've answered the question and you developed it through really good theory. Yeah. That is our first analysis. Now, the evaluation, I actually don't mind. There are two evaluations. Both of them work really well, and both of them are really solid. I'll tell you why I have a small preference for number two, but let's just start with number one. Number one is time lag. It's going to take ages to develop skills, especially high skills, right? In order for people to be equipped with skills that are relevant to the economy, that allow them to basically get back into the workforce and bargain for higher wages, it's going to take a while. This is not a quick fix to the immediate concerns the economy faces due to globalization. So that one, you could explain that and develop it fairly easily. The alternative is this, and I think this is a really good one because what you could say is, look, for the government to enable to actually invest into education and training programs, they need to spend a lot of money. Now, some of you may be turning around and going, oh, opportunity cost. As you know, for those of you that have been to this live before, we are better than opportunity cost. Stop telling me opportunity cost. Only if it's an 8 marker, by all means, opportunity cost all the way to the 8 marker. For a 25, though, you're going to talk about the UK government's fiscal deficit. You're going to say, hey, the increase in spending is going to increase the fiscal deficit. And therefore, national debt is likely to also go up. The UK debt as a proportion of GDP is roughly about 95%. You can say 100%. In other words, it's pretty high. And if the government spend even more money and the debt increases even more, what might happen to the UK's credit rating? Well, the UK's credit rating could get downgraded. And if the UK credit rating gets downgraded, the demand for UK government bonds, which hopefully you know are called gilts, will go down. And if the demand for gilts goes down, the price goes down. And if the price goes down, the interest rate, the yield on the bond goes up. Big problemo. Because now it's harder for the government to pay back their debts. A fancy way of saying that is harder for the government to service their debts. Yeah. Now, bear in mind, by the way, that is already excellent. But I want to add one more layer. And the reason why I think this is a better paragraph is because of this, because it directly then evaluates what we just talked about. When the debt becomes really high and the cost of servicing the debt is really high, the UK government may end up doing what it did in 2010, which is they adopted a policy called austerity. Austerity is really significant cuts to government spending. And when the government cuts spending significantly, who does that harm more? Is it high income or low income households? It is obviously low income households. They get impacted far more than high income households because when the government cut into areas like education, it's state education. Private schools aren't affected. So people who are like more affluent, they're not that badly affected. The NHS is more likely to be used by low income households. You get the gist, right? In other words, if the government adopt austerity like they did in 2010, then it actually could backfire and widen income inequality all over again. Does that make sense? That is our first analysis and first evaluation. I think that's excellent. Yeah. Right. Let's do the second analysis in terms of the micro side. Okay, so micro, we're going to actually do two different ones. This is the one that I probably would do in the exam because I feel like you can develop it in more detail, but the other one is also pretty good as well. Yeah. Okay. One of the problems I said they have is that firms in your economy have struggled to compete against TNCs. So what could I do? I can subsidize those firms, yeah? And let's discuss how we basically develop this. So the starting point would be one macroeconomic policy that could be used to combat the issues of globalization is to subsidize domestic firms, yeah? You then again, remember the structure. You need to identify what the problem is. Domestic firms, they probably give you an example in the extract, have really struggled to compete against TNCs on a global basis, blah, 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 right? And then you go, subsidies do what? Now you could draw a supply and demand diagram. We're here to draw a supply and demand diagram. We're here to draw a cost and revenue diagram. And let's understand what would shift because it makes sense if you just understand the logic. What is a subsidy? A subsidy is a grant given by the government to producers, which decreases their cost of production, resulting in lower prices and higher output. Okay. By the way, that last bit is really important because if you shift it and you only shift AC as like a fixed cost, what you'll see, by the way, is that the output would not change and the price would not change. And that's a big clue that you've probably done the wrong thing. Yeah. It needs to be a variable cost because the government are going to subsidize every unit. So let's say they're trying to promote, I don't know, the electric car companies that are trying to set up in the UK or whatever the industry is. They'll give you an extract and there'll be things that you can use for paper three. So what does that do? It's going to decrease their variable costs. So let's start off with the firm making supernormal profit. Here's AR is equal to D, and here's MR. Profit maximization is there, Q1. Go up to the AR curve. That's the price, P1. And then we want to make supernormal profit, sort of like that. Okay, so AC, your best friend is Q1. You always go up from the quantities, you hit the AC curve, and that's C1, yeah? And this is A, and this is B, okay? All right, we just said, look, the variable costs are going to go down for the firms that are being subsidized. So what does that mean? That means that both MC and AC are going to go down. We start always with MC. So we now draw this MC2, go to the new profit maximizing level of output, Q2. Here's the new price. That's P2. And then finally, we now shift the AC curve, remembering that it hits at its lowest point on the new MC curve. So go up from Q2, hits the AC curve right there, and that's C2. Okay, D and E. Right, I want to show you guys something. I want to show you how much depth you can offer yourselves by drawing a cost and revenue diagram rather than a supply and demand diagram. The first thing we're going to talk about is the fact that the prices that British firms are going to be charging now post-subsidy decreases from P1 to P2. Okay, let's show off. First thing that we can show off with is if prices are falling, allocative efficiency is going up. If prices are falling, consumer surplus is going up. But let's keep going. If prices are falling, Do you guys agree that British firms now become more internationally price competitive? I know, it's macro. Calm down. It still affects the firm. It's still valid, yeah? So that means they might be able to compete on a global basis. They're able to sell their goods now more easily because they're more attractive on a global basis, yeah? That's something that you could talk about, yeah? It could be that it's gonna, so do you notice that there's an extension along the demand curve? So we go, prices falling from P1 to P2. There's an extension along the AR curve demand from Q1 to Q2 because the prices are lower. If the extract says something about how like globalization has resulted in like massive levels of job losses and like people are struggling for jobs, you can add a little bonus point here. Why? Because labor is derived demand. And therefore, if there is suddenly more demand for the goods being produced by this firm, they're going to hire more workers. And so we resolve the issue of unemployment here as well, right? So you could be, I'm just giving you guys loads and loads of points. You don't have to do all of these points because I'm aware of the fact that you guys will have limited time and you can't do all of this, yeah? So you try to contextualize it around the data as best as possible. The last thing, the easiest, most important thing to talk about is the fact that their profits are going up. Their profits are going to rise from P1 A, B, C1 to P2 D, E, C2, yeah? And then you could talk about the fact that they could invest the profits. And if they invest the profits, they could use that to, I don't know, like innovate. But you give you an example of what they could invest the money into. They become more dynamically efficient. And that makes them even more globally competitive. In other words, they're now able to compete against the TNCs. They're like, bring it on. We can fight you now. Yeah. That is the analysis. And I honestly think that is excellent analysis. Yeah. Let's evaluate. You have a choice. Let's go through two evaluations. Again, paper three, you've got lots of options here. The one that I would do is I think you could be really clever and speak about the fact that subsidies are a form of protectionism. Do you guys agree that protectionism, there are three types or three policies that you need to know? There's tariffs, there's quotas, and there's subsidies. In the Locke specimen paper, it has a whole extract about how the EU were basically going to place a massive tariff on Chinese telecommunications equipment precisely because the Chinese were being accused of doing this, of subsidizing their firms. So you could talk about how it could trigger a trade war. If other countries look at the UK doing this and go, whoa, 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 what is this? That's not fair. They might start placing tariffs on British firms. And if they place tariffs on British firms, that's a tax. That therefore increases the variable costs for the British firm. It offsets the decrease in the variable cost from the subsidy. Yeah. If there are quotas placed on British firms, they can't sell as much in the global market. Their export earnings therefore start to go down. Make sense? So that's a very clever evaluation that I think you could go down. It's a very, very good one. Yeah. Alternatively, what else we could talk about is the fact that there's a real danger of creating like a dependency culture amongst these firms. If you subsidize these firms, the quality of their goods actually start to deteriorate. There's no guarantee that they're going to invest the profits. And if anything, they start to become inefficient. They start to incur costs that are unnecessary just because the government are constantly like backing them and subsidizing them and protecting them. That is a good evaluation as well. Both of them are entirely valid. Yeah. Now that essay, by the way, is done. Yeah. But can I show you an alternative analysis for the micro side in the event that the extract was about this and you could basically incorporate the extract more easily? I, in 90% of cases, want you to be drawing a cost and revenue diagram for the micro paragraph. But one of the problems of globalization is the fact that globalization has resulted in huge levels of pollution. There are huge external costs, whether it's because of planes, like ships, goods and services going back and forth, etc. All of this has resulted in high external costs. So what could you do now? Well, you could throw back to paper one, a 10 marker, and do a tradable pollution permit scheme. And if we're going to do that as our analysis, this is how we develop it. Let's go. We basically talk about how one microeconomic policy that the government could adopt to address the issues of globalization is tradable pollution permits. Yeah, or a tradable pollution permit scheme. Again, the second part of this is to identify what the problem is. So you quote from the extract and it goes, oh my God, there's so much pollution and it's really bad for the environment, right? And then you now draw the following, and you're going to say my favorite sentence in theme one. So we're going to start by drawing a negative externality diagram. So what do we have? We've got quantity over here, cost slash benefits over here, negative externality, two slightly pivoted upward sloping lines like this. It follows there is only one downward sloping line like this. That is marginal private benefit, and it's equal to marginal social benefit. Right, you then dot down from the points where they intersect, like there and there. And then you say to yourself, all right, negative externality, is it where we do too little or too much? Well, we're doing too much. So this is therefore QE, and this is QSO. That's the ideal amount that we want to be producing. PSO, PE. Someone asked me recently, by the way, they're like, how would you define the social optimum? The social optimum is where social cost equals social benefit, by the way. Yeah, it's the ideal point for society to be at. And at that point, there will be no market failure. Yeah, right now, we are not a social optimum. We are operating at equilibrium over here. And because that point is the equilibrium point, can you guys see that only one of the lines going through that point has not been labeled? Oh, sorry, only one of the lines goes through it. That is private, always. MPC, which is basically the supply curve, and this is MSC. And finally, we go and draw the welfare loss triangle. Okay, so that. Okay. Whether you impose a tax or whether you do a pollution permit, you now say my favorite sentence in theme one, which is the effect of the permit is to internalize the external cost associated with pollution. So, for example, if you do this, let's say for the airline industry, you're essentially saying to airline companies that, hey, if you want to continue polluting at the same quantity that you were before, you got to pay for it because we're only going to give you a certain amount of allowance each year, and then you need to go and buy the extra amounts. What does that do to their costs? Well, their costs obviously go up. And they're going to go up to the point where we want to shift right through the social optimum over here. Yeah. And that is MPC plus permits. And that's another really good analysis. You can now explain how it's going to be good because there's less strain on the NHS. You could talk about how worker productivity levels might rise because of the fact that less people are taking time off sick. It's good for I don't know, the wildlife, right? It's good for everyone, right? Everyone's happy now. Yeah. So that's how you develop that paragraph. How do I evaluate it? Well, the evaluation is to talk about unintended consequences, which is a form of government failure. Do you guys agree that this is going to increase the cost of production for a lot of these firms? And if suddenly now these firms shut down or they relocate and move away from, let's say, operating in the UK, that creates job losses. And that therefore constitutes government failure. Yeah, in the January 2013 paper, I know we're going back a long time, it had an extract about how they were planning to do this in Australia for coal mining, and it said something like 40,000 jobs were directly at risk and a further 100,000 indirectly. There's your quote, and you now basically say, hey, this might be government failure, guys, and that's an exceptional evaluation again. Cool? That is how we deal with it. Right, let's do another question. What question do I want to do now? Right. You know what? I want to play a game. I want to show you guys how it is often the case that it's a macro topic that they ask about for the 25 mark. Not always. They will do loads of micro topics as well. But macro topics that then obviously you know what the macro point is because you've already done it in theme two or theme four. But how do we make macro concepts into micro? Yeah. And one of the questions that they could very easily ask about is what they did in June 2018. You know what? Let me show you the paper first, and then we'll play my little game. The paper was about Indonesia. June 2018. Wrong paper. Paper three. Here we go. Okay, so one of the 25 markers about Indonesia was this, question 2E. It says, evaluate the likely microeconomic and macroeconomic effects of the supply side policies recently introduced in Indonesia. Okay, now, of course, you want to relate it to the extract and you want to make sure that you're incorporating the extract, but just for the purposes of kind of full revision, I want us to go through as many supply side policies, like five of them. And in each scenario, I want you to know how to make that point micro. Yeah? So let's begin. The first and the go-to, the one that I always want you to basically talk about whenever they ask about supply side policies is investment into education and training programs. Okay. Now, I know in the previous essay that we just did, I did it as a macro concept. It's so easy to make it micro. How do I make it micro? Well, what I can say is that if I educate my workforce and they're more skilled, several things now happen. Number one is unit labor costs go down. That's a really important term. What is unit labor cost? Unit labor cost is the cost of each worker relative to the output the worker produces. Well, if they're more educated, they're now more productive, they're more efficient, their unit labor cost goes down. Productivity goes up. The level of human capital, another cool word that you can throw in, goes up. Right. How do I depict this on a cost and revenue diagram? Very easily. If productivity levels are rising, unit labor costs are falling, then variable costs are going down. You just saw the diagram. I just drew it for subsidies. It's exactly the same diagram. MC and AC go down, and then you go crazy. You can now talk about how they're going to generate more profit. You could talk about how the prices go down. They're becoming more globally competitive. Yeah, happy days for you. Yeah, that is the analysis. The evaluation, like we did a second ago, is time lag, or it could be fiscal deficit and national debt, credit rating, all of that. Number two, second supply side policy. A second supply side policy is a reduction in red tape measures. Right, what does that mean? Well, red tape measures are basically forms of regulation. Yeah. So if I deregulate, if I get rid of things like minimum wage, if I make it easier for firms to hire and fire workers, if I get rid of things like environmental laws, well, first thing first, do you guys agree that costs for firms are clearly going down, right? Obviously. But also, worker productivity is actually likely to go up. And the reason why it's likely to go up is because now workers are really scared about losing their job. They're like, uh-oh, if I don't hit targets, there's like loads of people that can easily take my job and I'm in trouble. Again, what therefore happens? Variable costs go down again, easy peasy, right? And you draw the same diagram again. What will be the evaluations here? Well, I probably do negative externalities. And the reason I do negative externalities is because if you're deregulating, you're allowing firms to pollute more, so you could do that. But that's not the only evaluation that you could do. Another evaluation that you could easily do is you could say, hey, if you have deregulation and now suddenly the workers are highly exploited, especially if they work for a monopsony, by the way, if they suddenly get exploited, what does that do to income inequality? It widens income inequality. What can you draw? You draw me a nice, lovely Lorenz curve, right? With the curve shifting this time outwards. Inequality is widening, yeah? And Gini coefficient is going up. Amazing evaluation. How easy is that? Number three, let's do another supply side policy. Another supply side policy is reduction in corporation tax. Okay, right. With this one, I feel like you need to do one step first, and then you can get to the kind of diagram, which is to say, hey, if firms have more profits, if there are more profits being retained by the firms because the government aren't taking away as much in the way of tax, what does that mean? They can invest it into capital machinery. And what does that mean? Variable costs go down. Do you see how repetitive this is? How easy is that? Yeah. The evaluation can be one of two things. One, the firms may not invest it. There's no guarantee they actually invest it. And it might depend on business confidence at the time. If they're feeling like, not particularly confident, maybe it's during COVID or maybe it's the aftermath of Brexit, then you go, well, they're actually not going to invest very much. They might just even pay out shareholders more dividends. But the alternative is to go down the macro route of saying fiscal deficit goes up, national debt goes up, credit rating gets downgraded, bonds. Easy peasy. Yeah. Number four, so easy, and we've done it. Subsidies. I just did it. Did you guys remember that subsidies are a supply side policy? Again, the same analysis that I just did a second ago. You apply it, lucky you. Last one is number five, is improve infrastructure. Okay, right. Couple of buzzwords about infrastructure. Well, do you guys agree that if they improve infrastructure, like they improve the roads, they build bridges, maybe ports, airports, etc., the first thing that you could talk about is that labor becomes more geographically mobile. You can also speak about how firms benefit from external economies of scale, right? What does that mean? External economies of scale is where the average cost of multiple firms in the market go down because loads of firms want to have access to this infrastructure. It is not exclusive to one single firm. They all now can use these roads. They can all now use these, airports and bridges and ports and whatever, right? So therefore, all of them benefit. And then very easily, productivity levels again go up. If it's easier to transport your goods back and forth, if it's easier for workers to move around, obviously that increases productivity. And if productivity goes up, variable costs go down. Can you see how repetitive this is and why I think paper three is the easiest, but the hardest time-wise, yeah? All right, in terms of evaluation for infrastructure, I think a good one there is that the building of the infrastructure, huge externalities. There is so much external costs that arise when they're building loads and loads of like bridges and roads and stuff like that. So you can do negative externalities or you could do time lag, yeah? In fact, actually in the June 2018 paper, if you look at the extract for the 8 marker, the A marker is about them building a dam, yeah? And if you read the extract, it goes here. It says 20 years of delays, yeah? But there's 20 years of delays in building the dam, right? And therefore, you can point to that and go, there's a massive time lag. This is not going to be a quick fix. There's not going to be these benefits that we just talked about. You're not going to see them for some time, yeah? Just in terms of how you word this question before I move on to another topic, yeah? It would be something like this, is one microeconomic effect of the supply side policies introduced in Indonesia is higher profits for firms. Okay, that's the topic sentence. In the second sentence now, you identify what that supply side policy is. Yeah. So if I was doing education and training, it talks about how they spend like 3.2 billion, I think, on education and training each year. I think it's healthcare as well. Yeah. But you can talk about that. Yeah. You could talk about how they reduce taxes as well, right? But anyway, whichever policy you're doing, you identify it from the extract, and then you now develop it the way I just developed it in terms of variable costs and draw a diagram and all of that. Yeah, easy, cool. That's us. Let's go and do another question. The question that I'd like us to do is as follows. It's a made-up question. Evaluate microeconomic and macroeconomic factors that limit or constrain economic development. Yeah. So, in a nutshell, what are the reasons why, on a micro and macro basis, that developing countries are struggling to grow? Okay. So, gonna have some Lucozade, and then we're gonna go through it together. All right. Are you ready? If you're ever stuck in the exam, hopefully you won't be. What you can do is just say to yourself, okay, do I just know what the topic is? If it was asked, let's say in paper two as a 25 marker, would I know what my go-to points are? Because it's actually pretty straightforward to make macro points into micro. So the two that stand out for me as the best theoretical explanations for why there is like low levels of development in, let's say, the Ivory Coast is number one, savings gap, and number two, primary product dependency, PPD. Okay. This, by the way, could be asked as a 25 marker in isolation, which I will deal with after this. Yeah. But let's just address this. In terms of the two, in all honesty, either of them I can make into a micro paragraph comfortably. But the one that I'm going to choose is this one. I want to start with that. And I want to show you guys how you basically go about and explain it in like kind of the key chains of reasoning. Because I think factor questions are more awkward than effects. Effects are much easier. Effects and impacts and like policies, they're normally a lot easier than factors. But let's deal with it. This is what you basically say. Yeah. What you'd write down is something like this is one microeconomic factor that inhibits or constrains or limits economic development, whatever the word they use in the exam, is primary product dependency. Okay, that's my topic sentence. What do I now need to do? I now need to use the extract and identify what their primary product is. It will be very obvious. Yeah, so let's say if it's about my favorite country, the Ivory Coast, then it would obviously be about cocoa. So you would say something along the lines of, many farmers in the Ivory Coast, remember that farmers are firms, by the way, many farmers in the Ivory Coast are highly reliant on the production and sale of cocoa as their main source of earnings and like jobs. Yeah, like that. Yeah. And then you identify the big problem. The first big problem is the fact that primary products like cocoa are super duper volatile in price. Yeah. Their prices, if you look at it over time, it looks something like this. And again, there might be a figure, in which case you are definitely quoting from the figure for me at this point. Yeah. So they're super volatile. Now, I could run through the problem of the prices being too high and the prices being too low. I kind of feel you run out of time, and I kind of want to get to the point where I'm drawing the diagram if I can quicker, sooner rather than later. But what I would immediately say is this, is if there is a very good harvest, right? Let's understand this. If there is a really good harvest, and let's say there's an abundance of cocoa, there's so much cocoa being produced, do you guys agree that that means the price will be very low? It's not scarce at all. If there is loads and loads of cocoa in the market, the price of cocoa is super duper low. So the price suddenly collapses. So you go, if there were a really good harvest, the supply would be so high that the price falls dramatically. The thing about cocoa, though, is that do you think commodities are elastic or inelastic in demand? Their PED is clearly less than one. It is inelastic, yeah? If the price of cocoa goes down, you don't go crazy and eat loads of extra chocolate, right? So what happens? It means that when the prices collapse, demand, yeah, it does go up, but demand doesn't go up very much because it's inelastic. The fancy way of saying that is the fall in the price results in a less than proportionate rise in demand. In other words, the price is collapsing way more than how much demand is increasing by. What is happening to their revenue? Their revenue is going down. Some of them might even, Skepta, they might even shut down. Thank you, right? So that means that there's like mass unemployment. So this is really problematic for the farmers that rely on selling cocoa. When the price is really low, they're struggling. But let's add a bit more chains of it. Now, I could go down the route of, yeah, when the price is really high, the PES is inelastic. Valid, I don't mind. But I want to now talk about the fact that, hey, the problem then is the volatility in the market deters these farmers from investing. Yeah. These farmers are really scared to invest because they don't know whether the next harvest is going to suddenly like bankrupt them. So if investment is low, this is what I want us to talk about. And in order for us to be able to make a really sophisticated point, and bear in mind, you could skip this step in truth and it would still be valid and still very good. But I just want to explain one concept to you guys. It is something that you learnt about almost in passing in theme two, which is that there are two measures of investment. The first measure of investment, oh, that was the wrong thing. The first measure of investment is called gross investment. Right, what does that actually mean? Yeah. So in really simple terms, let's make up a random example. Let's say that our economy, to begin with, has 10 laptops. Yeah. And then in the year, we add two laptops added. So now we have 12 laptops. Okay. Our gross investment is simply just two laptops. Yeah. Because it's just how much the capital stock is increased by. Cool. Net investment, which is a better metric, is a formula. And it goes like this. Net investment equals gross investment, let's call it gross I, minus capital depreciation. Okay, what does that actually mean? So I know that sounds potentially terrifying to some of you. Let's explain it in really simple terms, yeah? It basically means that I want to look at how many laptops we added to our economy, but I need to minus from the 10 that were already there. How many of them have stopped working? How many of them are just there and we don't use them anymore? Because hypothetically, let's assume that of the 10 laptops that we had in the economy, three of the laptops weren't actually being used that year. What is our net investment? Well, think about it. Two was how much gross investment was. Minus, well, three laptops died. They stopped working. Two minus three is obviously minus one. In other words, net investment is negative. And that is such a clever way of saying that they're not going, even when they invest, they might be investing at a rate that's slower than how much the capital stock is depreciating by. The way I would word it is this. I would go, if gross investment is outpaced by capital depreciation, then net investment will be negative. And if net investment is negative, productivity starts to go down. And if productivity starts to go down, variable costs start to go up. Let's draw it. So let's draw variable costs going up because we did one about variable costs going down, just the opposite really, but it's a good habit. Okay, let's draw like oh, like this. So quantity, cost slash revenue, and here's MC. Right, this is AR equals D. This is MR. And then we go to profit maximization. That's Q1. That's the price, P1. And finally, this is the cost to start off with. AC, you know what, let me go a bit faster. C1, AB. Cool, right. We said variable costs are going up, yeah? Because of the fact that productivity levels are now lower compared to before, yeah? So MC, let's do that as one, and that as one. MC is now going to rise like this. Doesn't matter how much it rises to. Profit maximization now occurs here. This is Q2. I go all the way up till I hit the AR curve to get the price. The price has gone up to P2. And finally, I want to shift my AC curve up. I am going to make them make a loss. They don't have to make a loss, by the way, but I'm just going to make them make a loss. Okay. C2, and this is D, and this is E. Okay. We have a lot to say here because the first thing we could talk about is the fact that the prices are going up. And the prices going up means that allocative efficiency is going down, as is consumer surplus. Lovely. Their sales are going down from Q1 to Q2. Yeah. They're having to lay off workers, by the way, because of the fact that there's less demand for their cocoa now. And then finally, profits are going down. Now, if their profits are going down, they have less money to innovate, they have less money to invest. The thing to be wary of, by the way, is that with this type of question, it required a lot more chains of reasoning before we got to the point where we drew the diagram. So just be very wary of time because if you just go through it in terms of the profitability going down, that's actually enough. You've got enough depth there to definitely be in the top level of analysis, and then you can move on and evaluate. Cool. That is the analysis, and that is our first limitation for why, developing countries are struggling to grow. Let's evaluate. There is a genius evaluation. It is such a good evaluation. The brilliant evaluation is forward markets. Because forward markets, just to explain how they work, is where a farmer, in this case a cocoa farmer, they will agree to sell their cocoa for a fixed price in the future, and they are guaranteed to get that price. Whatever happens to the market price, they're getting that price. And therefore, they can plan ahead with a lot more conviction. They don't need to worry about the exchange rate. Sorry, they need to worry about the prices fluctuating because it doesn't matter. They've locked in a price, and as a result, they're not impacted by the fluctuations as much. That is superb evaluation. The alternative to this, by the way, but I feel like it's too time consuming, is to do a buffer stock scheme. Yeah, I have a whole video about the buffer stock scheme. It was asked in last year's paper, by the way. Paper 3 is a 12 marker. But I feel like it just takes too long to explain and draw the diagram. Forward markets is easier. It's like it's brilliant as well. I would do that. Yeah, that is our micro point. Let's do our macro point. Our macro point is the savings gap. Can I just go through the savings gap from start to finish? I can't remember if I did it in the paper 2 live or not. It's still good revision anyway. So, together. In many developing countries, like the Ivory Coast, the savings rate tends to be very low. And the problem is as follows. So, firstly, why is there a low savings rate? The first reason is that the GDP per capita in these economies is really, really low. The average earnings are extremely low. A lot of people are in absolute poverty. That means that they have a very high marginal propensity to consume, right? Fancy word? Let's make sense of it. What does it mean? Marginal means an additional unit. So propensity to consume means for every extra dollar you earn or pound or whatever currency it is, how much of it do you spend? How much of it do you consume in the economy? Well, if you earn, hypothetically, let's say you earn $2 in a day, and then suddenly your earnings go up to $3. Are you going to save the extra dollar that you just earned? Or are you going to probably use every single penny to just buying necessities? Obviously, the latter, right? The fact that you're so poor means that you need to spend all of your income on basic necessities, right? Therefore, the MPC is sky high. And the problem with people not saving is that the banks lack the profit motive to set up in these countries. How do banks make money? Banks make money because you and I put our money in the bank and then they lend it out and they make money that way. If no one is saving, if no one is saving, then that means that banks are like, no thanks, I ain't setting up. Therefore, even the people that are in the economy that want to save, they can't really save. It's logistically very difficult because you have to, I don't know, lug some cash for like 10 miles to get to a bank. Are you likely to do that regularly? No, you're not. Yeah. So, in a nutshell, savings are very, very low. Just before I develop that, because I know it's a one market in paper two, and I just want to make sure that you guys are familiar with this concept. It's very similar. It's something called capital flight, just in case the extract is talking about this. Right, what does that mean? Capital flight means that money in the economy, so like the rich people in the economy, the TNCs in the economy, they are not keeping it or not putting their money in the banks in that economy. They don't trust the system, basically. They bank elsewhere. They have their money overseas. That contributes to the savings gap. Why? Because it just contributes to the fact that the banks that are in the economy have very limited funds. And if they have limited funds, do you guys agree that that means that it's very difficult for firms in the Ivory Coast to borrow money? And whatever money they do borrow, the interest rate would be so high. It will be so high because of the fact that there are hardly any banks, and the banks that are there have so little money to lend out that they're going to charge an extortionately high interest rate. And therefore, what ends up happening is that savings being low means investment is also low, and investment is crucial. And the reason why investment is crucial is because investment doesn't just shift out aggregate demand, it also shifts out the LRAS curve. And so you end up with the following chain. You go low savings, results in low investment, low capital accumulation, and thus low economic growth and development. And that is the analysis. You'll notice, by the way, there isn't really a diagram in that paragraph. It's okay. Yeah, you don't have to have a diagram all the time. Most of the 25 markers that you're going to do will have a diagram. Here, there is no obvious diagram. So relax. It's all good. Yeah. Right. The evaluation to that. The evaluation to that, I think, is twofold. One is taken from June 2018, even though they didn't ask about this, but if they had, in June 2018, they have a 12 marker about the benefits of aid to Indonesia. That's our first part of the eval. And the second part of the eval, by the way, is from June 2012, Unit 4. It's about Africa and how Africa technology is taking off. Let's understand it. So the overarching point will be this, is that, however, the savings gap may not be as big a limitation as it once was, or as big a constraint as it once was. This is for two main reasons. One, if countries are now getting aid, whether that's financial aid or whether it's aid in the form of like clothing and I don't know, food parcels, etc., 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 yeah? What does that mean? It means that those individuals in those economies do not need to spend as much of their income now on basic necessities. They can instead now save some of their money, and so the savings rates might start to go up. That's one. Number two is technology, and that is a really good point. And I reckon if they ask about this, it probably will be in the extract. Because if it talks about how technology has advanced pretty rapidly over the past 20 years, a lot of transactions in Africa are now conducted from mobile to mobile. In other words, digitally. And the benefit of that is that you no longer need to carry large sums of money to a bank. You can save so much more easily because, for example, if you're, let's say, a shopkeeper and you want to, someone wants to buy your product, they don't need to give you cash. They can just do a digital transfer that wires it from their bank account to your bank account. You no longer need to carry large sums of cash to a bank 3 miles away, 5 miles away. There's no chance of you getting robbed as well. It therefore makes it easier to save. And so we can go, hey, maybe the savings gap is not as big a deal as it used to be. And that would be a great 25 marker. Yeah. Remember, by the way, 25 markers, you also want to do a judgment. So in the judgment, really, the main thing that you want to do is like pick a side about which one's more like of limitation and offer some policy advice. So it could be something along the lines of, on the balance of evidence, the more significant factor is primary product dependency. It probably says in the extract, it does, by the way, in the 2020 paper, paper two, it says 54% of export earnings are cocoa related, kind of high, right? So you can quote that there and go, given that they're so reliant on cocoa, the government need to start investing into other sectors of the economy, especially manufacturing. So they diversify their economy. Yeah. In other words, you're telling the government, listen, this is a big factor. It's a big problemo. Fix it this way. Cool. Lovely. Let's go. Let's do a 25 marker on two things. One on specifically primary product dependency. Yeah, just on that, the macroeconomic effects of primary product dependency. So I've done the first analysis already, which is on a micro level. profitability is likely to be low. Yeah? Because of the fact that prices are so volatile, exactly as I just developed it a second ago, you would do it again. You'd say, hey, volatility, if prices collapse, demand is inelastic. So therefore, the reduction in the price results in a less than proportionate rise in demand. So they're going to basically generate way less revenue and they're going to shut down and all of that, right? And then you evaluate it with forward markets. Number two, on a macro level, I want us to deal with Prebisch-Singer. Let's talk about Prebisch-Singer. The Prebisch-Singer hypothesis, in a nutshell, says the following. It says that countries like the Ivory Coast that are highly reliant on exporting commodities like cocoa will be able to import less and less for any given level of exports over time. Right, let's understand why. According to Prebisch-Singer, the YED for manufactured goods is greater than the YED for commodities, especially food. And therefore, as global incomes go up, the demand for manufactured goods will go up more than that of primary products. And so their terms of trade are going to deteriorate. Right, I went really fast. Let's make sense of it really, really slowly. Yeah? Okay, so firstly, what's YED? YED, you should remember, is the income elasticity of demand, meaning that as your income goes up or down, whether you demand more or less of a good. We're assuming that both commodities and so like primary products and manufactured goods are normal goods. In other words, as income goes up, we're going to demand more of these goods, right? But do you guys agree that if your income goes up, you are not going to consume and demand crazy amounts of food? Like you're not going to triple your consumption of food simply because your income has gone up. In other words, your YED for food is likely to be less than one. It's likely to be very inelastic. It will obviously go up. You'll demand more, but not dramatically more. Yeah. In contrast, though, manufactured goods are things like laptops, cars. I don't know, like things like that, phones, right? And those are far more elastic in demand because as your income goes up, if you, for example, let's say bought a second laptop and you only owned one laptop before, that is a 100% increase in the demand for laptops. Now, the diagram I'm about to draw and that I've drawn before in previous lives, is not is not a diagram that I need you to draw. I just need you to understand it so that you understand where we're going with our point. So if I quickly draw two economies side by side. So Q, Q, P, P. Okay. S1, D1, right, it's just really rough. Q1, P1, okay, do that as P1 as well. Okay. So let's assume that the market on the left-hand side is the market for cocoa. So this is the Ivory Coast. And the right-hand side is, let's say, China, yeah? So China sell manufactured goods, the Ivory Coast sell a commodity, a primary product. Okay. Do you guys agree that global incomes are practically always on the rise? Yeah, there are very few exceptions in history where global incomes have gone down in the last 100 years. So we assume they're going up. Now we said, look, that when the demand or when incomes go up, the demand for commodities will go up, but it's inelastic. So by the way, bear in mind in this example at the moment, at this price of P1, if the Ivory Coast export 1 unit, it enables them to import 1 unit. Yeah, so if we're dealing with like terms of trade, it's the price index of exports over the price index of imports, right? So they are able to sell 1 unit and buy 1 unit from the world at the moment, yeah? But now global incomes go up. So we assume demand goes up a little bit for cocoa. It's a little tiny increase in demand. So good for the Ivory Coast, because the Ivory Coast now can charge a higher price. The problem for the Ivory Coast is that because manufactured goods are far more elastic in demand, demand doesn't just go up a little bit. Demand goes up a lot. So it does this, D2. All right. Do you remember how I began by saying, in our made-up example, that when the Ivory Coast exported 1 unit to China, they were able to buy 1 unit to begin with? Is that still the case? Well, obviously the answer is no. From a mathematical perspective, by the way, if you look at this fraction, the price of their exports have gone up, but the price of their imports have gone up at a faster rate. So what is happening to the overall number? It's decreasing. In other words, their terms of trade are declining, they're deteriorating. Now, why is that an issue? The reason why it's an issue is twofold. Number one is that these economies, and you can add to this, have limited foreign reserves. Yeah, they don't have many currencies other than their own. So, for example, they don't have like dollars and yen and euros. And so the issue they've got is that it's really difficult for them to import because they have to sell more and more of their currency to buy $1. Now that their goods that they're selling are worth less, it means that they cannot import as much as they were able to before. They're struggling to import. And what do they need to import? Well, they need to import badly technology and manufactured goods or like, capital machinery. This therefore stifles economic development. Economic development, therefore, is very, very low and limited due to the fact that they are struggling to import because their terms of trade are bad. That's the analysis. The evaluation is to talk about how actually there are countries that have done amazingly, and that if they have a comparative advantage in the production of this particular commodity, they should specialize in that good. The Ivory Coast clearly has a comparative advantage when it comes to cocoa because they have the exact right climate to grow the cocoa. Therefore, you go, hey, you know what? It probably makes sense for them to be specializing in this. Cool. That is the potential evaluation that you could do. But again, remember, there's an extract and you can relate it around the extract. Right. Let's do, in my opinion, the absolute dream 25 marker. I mean, I would be so happy for you guys if this comes up, but let's see. They can ask, sorry, about a specific strategy to promote development and talk about the micro and macroeconomic effects of a particular strategy. And I want to show you guys the June 2017 Unit 4 paper. Is when you use that as the basis of our kind of made up question. So the 15 marker was this. It says, with reference to extract 3 and your own knowledge, evaluate tourism as a means of promoting economic development in Bolivia. Right, let's change the question. So what we're going to instead do is this, is that evaluate the microeconomic and macroeconomic effects of Bolivia developing their tourism sector. And I can't tell you how easy this question is, yeah? And how you need to write so fast to get the marks here, yeah? Let's start with macro. On the macro side, these are the key chains of reasoning that I would want you to basically incorporate into your essay. And now bear in mind there's data, and I'm not telling you to like be very kind of limited to my points, but these are theoretical concepts that are always going to work. The first thing that you can mention, so on a macro level, by the way, it will be something like this, is one macroeconomic effect of Bolivia developing their tourism sector is that it is likely to result in economic growth and development. Nice, clean topic sentence, yeah? And then you start showing off. The first thing that you can say is that tourism tends to be income elastic. It is a luxury good. Yeah. It's a luxury good. And so global incomes are practically always rising, like I said a second ago. And therefore, as global incomes rise, it results in a more than proportionate rise in demand for tourism for Bolivia. And therefore, that's great for them in terms of like that sector. Right now, I can go down the route of either talking about the tourists themselves and how when the tourists come over to Bolivia and they spend money in the economy, that counts as an export, by the way. But I think an even easier route to go down is this, is to basically say, hey, do you know what? If they develop the tourism sector and more people start to visit Bolivia, who's that going to attract? It's obviously going to attract TNCs. And what kind of TNCs is it going to attract? It's going to attract hotels, especially people like, I don't know, like Hilton, yeah? And then we are in dreamland. And the reason why we're in dreamland, within the time limits, by the way, don't go too crazy, is you now go, an increase in FDI causes AD to shift outwards because investment is a component of AD. Investment is also an injection into the circular flow of income. And so there is likely to be a positive multiplier effect. Are we done showing off? We're not done showing off because now you can tell them that, hey, you know what? It's a developing economy. A developing economy, their multiplier is likely to be massive because the rule or the formula, you don't write this out, by the way, is 1 over 1 minus MPC. The bigger the MPC, the bigger the multiplier. And guess what? Developing countries, as we know from the savings gap, their MPC is big. They have a limited income. So you go, hey, it's going to result in a multiplier effect. This is the number of times the rise in national incomes exceeds the initial injection that caused it. In a developing economy such as Bolivia, the multiplier is likely to be large as the MPC is high. Am I done? Am I done? We now explain the multiplier with an example. Do you guys agree that the TNCs, Hilton, for example, can hire more workers? Give me examples of jobs that they hire. More receptionists, I don't know, more cleaners, more waitresses, yeah, waiters, yeah. Don't give me a whole like list of jobs, like give me two of them, yeah. Those people have now income. What do they do with their income? They spend it. Consumption in the economy therefore goes up. And if there is more consumption in the economy, labor is derived demand. And if suddenly there is more demand for goods and services in the economy, there'll be more demand for labor. And if there's more demand for labor, it reduces cyclical unemployment. Okay. Once the examiner stops salivating and like wipes the spit off your paper, they now just like go, you know what, there's no point in reading that, rest of this. This is already a star, but I'm enjoying it so much, I'm going to keep reading it. Yeah? You now draw the diagram, and we're going to show off with that diagram because we're not going to shift the AD curve once, we're going to shift it out twice because of the multiplier. So it'll look like this. So let's draw. Dum, dum, dum. So this is real GDP, and this is price level. and this. It's the LRAS curve. Okay, right, 81, Y1, P1, 82 over here. And that's because of the increased FDI. And then finally, 83. If you're running out of time, by the way, the 83 is proper, not that necessary. This is me like adding in bonus just for you guys to show off a little bit, but you don't need to do this. Okay, right. All we do is summarize the diagram. And bear in mind, by the way, there are so many chains of reasoning preceding this point that you need to be very wary of time. You need to write like someone has a gun to your head, like write fast if this comes up, yeah? And then you could just summarize it in terms of economic growth goes up. A really clever way, if the question is specifically about economic development, to link it back to development, is that do you guys agree that economic growth we measure as GDP? But the metric they use for the HDI ranking is GNI, yeah? So gross national income. Whenever GDP goes up, GNI also pretty much always goes up. So you could just say, hey, this is going to increase the GNI for Bolivia, and therefore the HDI ranking is likely to go up. And now you've answered about development, and they cannot accuse you of not applying it to development. Easy peasy. That's our first analysis, and that is sensational analysis. Yeah. Let's evaluate. There are two evaluations that I want to combine into one to basically say that actually developing the tourism sector is a fairly risky strategy. The first reason why is because the tourism sector is very fashionable. Certain destinations become popular, and therefore, especially like if it starts to trend like on TikTok, on Instagram, and suddenly people start all going to that destination rather than your country. So you could spend all that money as the government improving the infrastructure in trying to basically, advertise and get people to come to your economy like on holiday and blah 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 blah. And then suddenly, like most people start to switch over to like a substitute. Yeah. That's the problem, is that you have there's always the danger that other destinations open up and become more popular than your destination, and so suddenly demand declines for you. One. Number two, a really good one, is that the tourism sector is so vulnerable to external shocks. And the external shock that I definitely want you to talk about, that if they ask about this, is probably going to be in the data, is COVID. Obviously, COVID. COVID would have impacted tourism more than any other sector in the whole world. Like, there's no sector that was impacted more than tourism. And you could talk about that. You can incorporate the data at that point. High five. Yeah? That is the macro. Let's do micro. Micro is even easier. To be honest, I don't even know why I started with macro, but let's do micro. Right. On a micro level, do we agree that obviously if there are more people going to Bolivia, it's amazing for like restaurants, I don't know, bars, cafes, whoever, yeah? Again, they might give you an example of a firm, right? The overarching point is this, is one microeconomic effect of Bolivia developing their tourism sector is higher profits for Bolivian firms. And then you explain that, hey, there's an influx of tourists. They're coming to your country and spending money. Lovely. What would shift? Obviously, MR and AR, demand. So let's draw it because I want to show you guys something. Hopefully you guys are realizing, by the way, that paper three, you should smash paper three. You just need to get your timing right. If you get your timing right, you're going to do so well in this paper. AR1 equals D1, and this is MR1. Okay, profit maximization is where MC equals MR. This. The price is over here, P1, and let's have the cost like this, AC. And the cost is there, C1. Okay. And we just said, hey, look, there are more people coming to the economy. So if there's more people visiting Bolivia, there'll be an outward shift of AR and MR. So let's shift it outwards. Okay, this is AR2 equals D2. And here is MR2. Yeah? Okay. Profit maximization, as always, occurs where MC equals MR. So it's there. Q2. The price is all the way up here. That's P2. And finally, we got from Q2 until we hit the AC curve. And I want to talk about something that happened here that gives us more depth. D and E. Okay, right. Let's summarize the diagram. So the first thing we can talk about is the fact that Bolivian firms are now able to charge a higher price for, let's say, their, I don't know, their meals, their coffee, or whatever the industry is that they're clearly talking about in the extract. Yeah, so they're going to charge a higher price from P1 to P2. Their sales are going to go up from Q1 to Q2. Now, Of course, at that point, if you're running out of time, jump and talk about profits, no problemo. If you have the time, this is how you can get more depth than everyone else. Can you guys see that the costs are falling from C1 to C2? Why? Why are the costs falling? Well, the costs are falling because the firm now, as a bigger firm selling more output, can tap into larger economies of scale. And you can give an example, like purchasing economies of scale. What would a cafe bulk buy? Coffee cups. They could bulk buy coffee beans, milk. I don't know, or whatever. It doesn't matter what they're bulk buying. Give an example that counts as application. And you can show off even more. And you can say, hey, when they bulk buy more and they tap into their economies of scale, they're operating closer to what's that funky place called? It's called the MES. It's the bottom of the AC curve. So if they operate near the MES, they become more productively efficient. Wow. Yeah. And once you've done that, you now talk about profitability going up from P1 ABC1 to P2 DEC2. Yeah. What can they do with the profits? Well, they can invest those profits to be more innovative. You can give an example of what they could do with the profits. And finally, wrap that up with dynamic efficiency goes up. How easy is that? Evaluation. What's the evaluation? Well, you have a choice, but I think the better one is this. I think if they ask about tourism, it will have an extract. I mean, I'm completely making this up, by the way, but it'll probably have an extract about how bad it is for the environment, right? There are so many countries in the world who the amount of litter that they have during peak seasons, it skyrockets during like summer months because of all the people that come over and just don't care about the environment. Yeah. So definitely externalities. Even by the way, the fact that there are more planes and ships and other modes of transport going back and forth, all of this translates into higher external costs. You draw a negative externality diagram, explain it, more strain on the health service, workers are going to get sick. It might be bad for industries like fishermen. I don't know. Yeah, like as in just develop the externality point and you're ace. Yeah. And that's comfortably 25 out of 25, right? So basically, like in the judgment there, I'd be talking about how it's amazing on both a micro and macro level. There is a danger that the small independent like independent Bolivian firms may struggle to compete against the TNC. Um, so the government might want to basically like give them subsidies, I guess, but that's a pretty rubbish advice to be honest. I don't even know to be honest. Maybe you can just have like a tax on like firms that set up because then the government can use that money to like pay for the health service and deal with the litter costs. I don't know. It doesn't matter. The judgment, by the way, as long as you are making a concerted effort to offer some sort of policy advice, they're just going to read it and go, yeah, okay, they've made some attempt at making a judgment here, yeah? So I would normally go, oh, on macro or macro, this is more significant, and the government should basically do something like that. Yeah. So here I would say that, look, it's great to boost economic growth in the economy and boost profits for the firms, but the government should be wary of the litter and the environmental impact. And so it may be the case that eventually they place a tax to try and limit the impact on society. I don't know, something like that. Yeah. All right, we've done quite a few 25 markers, yeah? I will come back to doing some 25 markers again, but like I said at the beginning of this, I actually think the 25 marker is by and large the easier question in this paper. You just have to obviously time it really well. The 5, 8, and 12 is where honestly they can ask some vulgar questions. Let's do one of them. I want to take you back to the June 2019 paper, which I think we began with, but you know what? It was a long time ago. I don't even know. So let's close these and start again. Paper 3, June 2019. Right, I need some water because I've been talking a lot. Right. And the question we're going to do is 2C. In fact, actually, both of these 12 markers were disgusting. The second one, not so much. The first one is absolutely revolting. I'm going to do that as well. Yeah. And it's here. Okay. I also just want to point you guys in the direction of the 8 marker that we began with. Yeah. Remember how we said there are two reasons, apart from access to finance, why 90% of the manufacturing sector in Mozambique is made up of small firms. Park that in your mind, yeah, because I often talk about how there are clues in other questions that you can then use later down the line, either in a 12 or a 15, or no, there's no 15 anymore, or a 12 or a 25 marker, yeah? Okay, right, let's go. The question we're doing is discuss whether borrowers benefit from microfinance. Make reference to Mozambique in your answer. Okay, first things first. Microfinance as a topic comes under macro. And just to go through the revision side of things, microfinance is where they give really small loans to extremely poor individuals or, like, let's say startups who would not normally be given a loan through conventional means. In other words, if they went to like a normal bank, there is no chance that the bank would give them a loan. And if they gave them a loan, the interest on the loan would be crazy high. Yeah. So the whole point of this is that we're going to give these individuals or these like small businesses a loan in the hope that they now use that money and invest it. It helps to bridge basically or fill the savings gap. Yeah. So despite the fact that there aren't many banks, if microfinance banks set up, it allows people to increase their living standards. They can consume more. They can maybe lift themselves out of absolute poverty. Individuals can startups can use that money to invest and then injection, multiplier, that. But what I want you guys to notice, and this is why you've got to be a bit careful and not just dive into answers on the exam on Thursday, is it is specifically asking about the borrowers. Now, if I'm dealing with the borrower, I can deal with it on an individual basis, but I think it's far easier to deal with it from the perspective of a firm borrowing. But what does that mean? That means the far easier route to answer this question and ensure you're actually answering the question and not going on a tangent is to deal with it on a micro level. And we're going to do that. We're going to answer this entire 12 marker as a micro question. Yeah, is that really clear? Because of the fact that it's specifically asking about whether the borrowers benefit from microfinance, it is far easier to deal with this from a micro lens, not a macro lens. Because if I deal with it on a macro lens, it's not that you can't get marks, you can, but you're going to end up steering so far away from the question that they can easily turn around and go, you're not really answering what we asked you. So let's very quickly read this extract. It's a very small extract, so it won't take long. Extract F. Microfinance in Mozambique. Microfinance in Mozambique started in the late 1980s through projects initiated by international relief organizations. The sector has expanded to include many private banks and non-governmental organizations, NGOs, see Figure 3. This has resulted in wider use, in brackets, over 100,000 borrowers, and many new business startups which could not have gained finance from any other source. Evidence suggests that there is unfulfilled demand for microfinance and a large potential for expansion. Okay, let's answer the question together, yeah? I already know because I've planned this, and you guys, when you sit there, you'll plan it as well, that I'm going to draw a cost economic diagram because I know it's about a firm. And what I know is that they're going to be able to borrow money that they wouldn't have been able to through conventional means. What are they likely to hopefully do with the money? Would you guys agree that hopefully they're going to invest it into capital machinery, like technology? And if they invest it into technology, like into capital, what happens to productivity? Well, productivity goes up. And if productivity goes up, the variable costs go down. That's going to be our point. I want to also point you guys to the direction of the wording of the question. Yeah. Do you guys notice that it doesn't say like factors, reasons, policies, effects? It's not plural. Yeah. In other words, one detailed analysis is more than enough to get you the 8 marks of analysis here. And that is what we're going to do here. Yeah. And then we're going to do one detailed evaluation as well. Let's go. The topic sentence will be this. One way in which borrowers benefit from microfinance is that their profits are likely to rise. Okay? That is a nice, clean topic sentence. It clearly tells the examiner what your point is. As quickly as possible, I want you guys to now incorporate the data. So you would say something along the lines of microfinance has enabled, and then where is it? Open quote, many new business startups which could not have gained finance from any other source. In other words, these businesses have set up purely because of microfinance schemes. So you quote that, right? And now you say firms, and remember the extract and the figure and the question you just did a second ago was about the manufacturing sector. So let's contextualize it. Let's talk about manufacturing firms. So we could go, as such, firms in the manufacturing sector would be able to take out these loans and invest them into capital machinery. By doing so, it increases their productivity levels, and thus variable costs for these firms are likely to fall. Remember, these firms are the borrowers, yeah? Let's draw the diagram. I know I've drawn it a few times already, but just so we get in the habit of drawing it and like repeatedly and then have it in front of us, let's do it one more time. I won't draw too many of these, but I want you guys to get in the habit of drawing the diagrams in my order as well, yeah? So let's do it. Cost slash revenue. So there's MC1. AR equals D, and there is MR over here. Right, profit maximization is this, Q1, and across there is P1, and then we've got our AC curve like here, AC1, and here's their cost. Okay, we just said that these firms that are investing the loan into capital machinery become more productive, and because they're more productive, variable costs are going to go down. So MC and AC are going to drop, yeah? So let's drop them. That's MC2. Profit maximization occurs over here. That's Q2. The price is now lower over here at P2. And then finally, this and this, AC2. Yeah? C2, D, and E. Right. I want to show you guys a couple of things about this diagram. Not only do I want to show you how easy it is to develop the kind of theory around the diagram, but how easy it is to then incorporate the data around it. Ideally, by the way, in most instances, you will know the answer from a theoretical standpoint, and then the data is there to just make your answer more beautiful. Yeah. Rather than relying on the data as the source of your answer. Now, there might be questions every now and then. For example, in the June 2022 paper, question 2B about Kenya, like demographic factors, I think it was, right? That was really specific to the data. You wouldn't just know that instantly. Yeah. But this, for example, I already know that I'm going to do this. Like when I draw that diagram, I already know that prices are going down. I know the output's going up. I know the profits are going up. But what I say to myself is rather than just quickly summarizing this as quickly as I can, let me use the data where I can. Do we agree the prices that these firms are now charging is decreasing from P1 to P2? Well, if you'd read the extract, I know we didn't read the extract, but you can read it in your own time. Not this extract, the one before it. Do you guys agree that lower prices means that these firms now become more internationally price competitive? And therefore they might be able to export more in the global market. Great. Do you know why? Because they are literally ranked 136 out of 137 countries. They're Burnley, yeah? They're second last. It's terrible, right? In other words, if suddenly their prices go down, that translates into them suddenly becoming a little bit more price competitive. Great. That means they might be able to earn some export earnings. Thumbs up to them, right? And then when I talk about the profitability going down, so going up, and how they could invest their profits into new technology, that further helps them in terms of competitiveness because their goods are now quality competitive as well. Do you guys understand then? When we're summarizing these diagrams, we can't just go price, output, profit. No problem. That's valid. You get marks. You get all the marks. But when you can incorporate the data into your analysis and into your evaluation, it just takes it up that little notch. It makes it become just a bit spicier. Yeah? Does that make sense? That is our analysis. Right, that is so good, by the way. So once you've drawn the diagram and explained the diagram, you've clearly identified and explained the benefit to borrowers, yeah? The borrower there being the firm, they're killing it. Yeah, they're doing really, really well. Let's evaluate. The evaluation is very nice and very set and very, very kind of like data heavy, which is the following. Is if you think about it, a loan, like a microfinance loan, is a fixed cost. Yeah, because you're going to take out a certain amount at a fixed interest rate. Okay, so the first thing is that it's a cost. So that automatically means that, it's their profits might be going down. But then we look at figure three. And I don't know about you guys, yeah, but the first time I looked at this figure, when I tell you my jaw hit the ground, what the hell is this, yeah? The interest rate, the average, not even like the average interest rate is 75%. Sorry, look at that one. It's 200%. Like that is like honestly, that is like immoral, yeah? But the point is that you're going to go, however, microfinance schemes may actually be harmful to borrowers. This is because the loan represents a fixed cost. And according to figure 3, the average interest rate on a microfinance loan in Mozambique is a staggering and astonishing 75%. And then we can use what we just did in the 8 marker. And this is where you've got clues and other questions and you can bring them back. Remember how the 8 marker that I began the entire live stream with, I began by saying that one of the reasons they're struggling to grow and why they're small is that global demand is depressed. It's sad. Yeah, it's global demand is depressed. It's like there's not enough people buying your goods. This. You can add that and go, given that the demand globally is depressed, these firms may struggle to generate enough revenue to repay this enormous interest rate, and therefore they may end up shutting down. And that is sensational evaluation. And you got 12 out of 12. Yeah. Hopefully that was clear. Hopefully that was nice. Let's go and deal with the other 12 market in this paper. It is absolute horror. Right. Um, I have done this in previous live streams. I genuinely can't remember if I did it this year, last year, the year before. If you're that much of a fan, thank you very much. Send me an email, I'll send you an autograph or something. But like, I am going to make sure to go through it just in case you guys haven't seen this. And I think this is a really difficult question. Yeah. It says it's partly, by the way, because of the fact that it's like very badly worded. Like, I don't think this is at all thought through by the exam board. It says this. It goes, in extract A, lines 15 to 16, it was suggested that some firms may respond to the advertising ban by cutting prices of their products. Using game theory and the information provided in Figure 1 and Extract A, discuss the effects on firms of cutting prices in an oligopolistic market. Oh my actual days. Yeah, I don't know about you guys. this is not nice, yeah? Can I just go through a variety of reasons why this is not nice? Especially the wording is not very nice. But the second is that they're asking you to incorporate game theory. Game theory is normally very straightforward if we have evidence of them colluding. If, for example, it was like, oh, they've raised their prices, okay, evaluation is game theory, prisoner's dilemma, you go, yeah, it's going to break up anyway. But here they're not colluding. They're reducing their prices in response to the advertising ban, in which case game theory becomes more awkward to incorporate. So ignore game theory for a second. Let's understand what's going on. So the context, by the way, is this. Crisp manufacturers like Walker's and I think there's a company called Tato, which is such a great name. Yeah, so there you go. Tato, KP, all of these guys, yeah? The government have just now passed a bill that means that it's illegal for them to advertise, yeah? Especially to kids. I think it was like certain times they're not allowed to advertise. Anyway, in a nutshell, there's an advertising ban. And in response to that ban, they're lowering their prices. Okay. The first thing I would want you to work out is you go to yourself, why? Why are they doing this? Like, why are Walkers responding to an advertising ban by lowering their prices? Because surely that sounds very illogical. And the rationale, if you've got it, by the way, give yourself a massive pat on the back. Very, very clever. Is that the advertising ban makes the market more contestable. Can I explain why? What is a contestable market? A contestable market is one in which the barriers to entry and exit are low and there are low sunk costs. Right, that's really fancy. Let's explain it in simple terms. It's a market where there's a genuine chance that new firms could enter the market. So if I look at it in terms of, let's say, the cafe market, that is fairly contestable because the barriers to entry into that market are pretty low. What do you need to set up a cafe? You need like, I don't know, like baristas who are probably paying like minimum wage. You need coffee beans, really cheap, milk, etc., etc., etc. Right? So in a nutshell, the variable costs and the barriers to entry into that market are low. One of the big barriers to entry into markets like this is advertising. Because of the fact that Walkers were able to spend huge amounts of money doing major campaigns, I don't know, like Gary Lineker and David Beckham and people like that, right? This is really expensive, but it means that they build up their brand loyalty so much, their brand awareness so much, that firms that are trying to enter the market just have no chance. They can't compete on a kind of in terms of their budget. But now there's a ban. It's a level playing field. No one's allowed to advertise. And if no one's allowed to advertise, the barriers to entry into the market go down. And so what are Walkers doing? Why are Walkers reducing their prices if the market now is more contestable? It's because Walkers are scared of losing market share. And they are probably adopting limit pricing. Let's go through limit pricing, right? And that's how you're going to explain this answer, by the way. So this is what limit pricing is. The best way to understand it is with a made-up example. So, okay. In a nutshell, limit pricing works like this. It's where Walkers purposely don't maximize their profits in the short run. And the rationale is that what they're going to do instead is they're going to set their price below the average cost of potential entrance to the market. Right, there's a lot of words. Let's make sense of it. They're not going to set it below their average cost. They're going to set it below the average cost of a firm that is thinking of coming into this market. Let's understand why. So, if I draw the AC curve for this market, it would look something like this. So let's make up some numbers as well. Here's the AC, yeah? Now, do you guys agree that Walkers, because figure one shows us that their market share is 55.3%, I think it was, yeah? Well, they're operating somewhere near the MES, right? They're producing so much crisps that the cost per unit is very, very low, right? Why? Why are they able to tap into massive economies of scale? And which economies of scale are we talking about? Well, they're able to bulk buy crazy amounts of potatoes and like crisp packets, right? Because they have such a huge market share that it's justifiable for them to bulk buy in that quantity. Let's say hypothetically then, the cost for Walkers happens to be 20p, making up numbers, yeah? And therefore, the profit maximizing price that they've worked out that gives them the most profit is, let's say, 90p for a packet of crisps. Okay. Now, because of the advertising ban, they're worried about losing market share. They're worried that their profits might go down. And so they want to do is maintain their market share and therefore dominate and continue to make high profits in the future. Yeah. So what they can say is to themselves, they go, okay, if a new firm were to enter this market, realistically, how much market share are they likely to have? Well, probably not very much. Let's say like 2, 3, 5%. Yeah. And they operate somewhere over here at Q2. Well, Walkers know what the different costs are in the market. They're able to work out roughly what that firm's average cost would be. And it just so happens that that average cost is 70p. This is what Walkers now decide to do. Walkers decide to be so immature, so immature. And do you know what they do? They cut their price to 67p. 67. Thank you very much, right? See how down with the kids I am? I know it's very lame, right? But the point is that that means that that firm that has entered the market, do you guys agree they can't compete against Walker in that price? Because every time they charge the same price as Walkers, they'd be making a 3p loss. Now, obviously, it could be a lot more extreme than that stupid number. Let's make it a bit more mature and do it like, I don't know, 50p. Yeah? That firm cannot compete against Walkers. So what are Walkers trying to do? Walkers, in a nutshell, are trying to do one thing. They're trying to deter. They're trying to put them off. They're trying to be like, listen, you don't want this smoke. Don't come here. Don't try it. Yeah, get out of here. And so what ends up happening is the firms decide, no, 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 I'm not going to enter the market. Yeah. And once the threat of entry has ended, and suddenly they've developed really strong brand awareness again and brand loyalty due to the low prices that they're offering, what ends up happening? Their profits go back up. They can maintain their dominance whilst also re-raising their prices once again. It's just potentially like a short run kind of strategy because they're terrified about the fact that there's genuinely a threat to entry now because of the advertising ban. So, how do I word this? It'll be something like this. One likely effect of Walkers cutting their prices in response to the advertising ban is to help them maintain their dominance in the market, or is to help them increase or maintain their profits. Yeah. You then explain it and you talk about how the advertising ban, you give a quote, is likely to make the market more contestable as advertising represents a sizable sunk cost. Yeah. And if that is the case, then the sunk cost, sorry, if the market becomes more contestable, the threat of entry is real. So what ends up happening? If that is the case, walkers are going to adopt limit pricing. You know, explain what limit pricing is. You go, hey, walkers are able to tap into large economies of scale. And therefore, by doing so, they can set a really low price. That low price enables them to deter to put off new firms from entering the market who cannot compete against that price. And so they can now dominate the market. They can re-raise their price and their profits now go back up. Yeah, that is the analysis. Let's evaluate. Right. If you are ever stuck in the exam and you are in need of game theory, but Prisoner's Dilemma is not working, like it doesn't really work here, I don't think. Yeah. Your go-to backup, which also comes under game theory, they can never ask about it, but they will always credit it. It will always be in the mark scheme and always say, hey, look, if they've talked about this, this is valid, they're allowed to, yeah. But in a nutshell, it's the king demand curve. So let's just go through the king demand curve very quickly. So it would be like this. So price and quantity. All right, we assume that walkers to begin with are selling this many crisp packets at QE, and the price that they're charging for their crisps happens to be PE. Okay. One of the assumptions of the diagram is this, is that if suddenly Walkers now raise their price, the other crisp manufacturers like Tato and KP are going to keep their prices unchanged. Because if they see Walkers raising their prices and they don't change their prices, they're hoping that a lot of the customers are now switching over to them. Therefore, from the perspective of Walkers, their demand above this price is very, very elastic. Yeah. Where the smallest increase in the price is going to result in a significant, more than proportionate fall in the demand. Now, we don't need to discuss that or describe that really in this answer because they're reducing their prices, but I just want you to understand it and you need to draw it. Second scenario is that Walkers now reduce their price. As the market leader, what are the other firms likely to do? Well, the other firms are also wary of losing market share to Walkers. They don't want to lose market share. And so they're also likely to reduce their prices. And so if they all reduce their prices, demand just goes up a little bit. No one's really gaining any traction here because everyone's got lower prices. This is AR, which is equal to D. And then I can really dramatically reduce the price from PE to P2. What does that show? If they all reduce their prices, it's going to result in a less than proportionate rise in demand. In other words, there's a big fall in the price, but a tiny increase in demand. Therefore, their revenue is going to go down. This is a very bad strategy. And there is evidence that loads of them, if not all of them, are going to do it. Because in the extract, it literally says, if I go back to the extract, this bit, it talks about how um, firms respond to the ban by, on average, this bit, lowering their prices. In other words, most of them are going to reduce their prices. Yeah. So it literally is not going to be very effective because if they're all reducing their prices, it's just going to result in all of them having less money. And if they all have less money, by the way, it actually could mean that firms could enter the market, but you don't need to go that level of detail. Yeah. But does that make sense? That would be how I would deal with that awkward, like really horrible 12 marker there. Yeah. All right. Let's go and do another question. The question is as follows. Evaluate the microeconomic and macroeconomic effects of higher interest rates. Okay, let's deal with it. So micro and macroeconomic effects of higher interest rates. So interest rates up. Okay. I think if you're ever stuck, a really good example is, or a really good strategy, sorry, is to say to yourself, well, obviously interest rates are under monetary policy, which is macro. Let me just whiz through everything I know. If it was just, this was a paper two question, and I was dealing with this on a macro level entirely, what are the key chains of reasoning that I need to address? Well, you should hopefully know that whenever you're dealing with monetary policy, they are always expecting you to run through the components of aggregate demand. Yeah? So what are the components of aggregate demand? Obviously, they are consumption plus investment plus government spending plus exports minus imports. Okay, let's go through them. Starting with consumption. Well, with consumption, there are various chains of reasoning that you could use to give yourself depth. The first thing that you're going to say to yourself is, okay, when interest rates are high, are people going to save more or save less? Well, they are going to save more. And the reason why they're going to save more is because the rate of return is more attractive. Yeah. In other words, the amount of money that I get back on my savings is now higher. Therefore, I have more incentive to save. If I save more, I consume. Of course, I consume less. Yeah. That's the first thing. Number two, the second thing that you're going to tell yourself is, okay, if interest rates are high, are individuals going to take out more or less loans? Well, if it's expensive to repay their loans, then that means that they're going to take out fewer loans and they're going to use their credit card, which is basically debt, a lot less often because it's expensive to pay it back. So what we do is credit purchases, they're going to go down, and therefore consumption again, of course, goes down. Yeah. The last thing is in terms of mortgages, because there are two types of mortgages that you can take out. So when you borrow money to buy a house, the first type of mortgage is called a fixed interest mortgage. Not interesting. The other type of mortgage is a tracker or variable mortgage, which basically tracks the central bank interest rate. So if the Bank of England raised interest rates, their base rate, that means that all the people that are on a tracker mortgage now have to repay a higher amount of interest per month. Do they therefore have more or less money left over? They obviously have less disposable income, therefore consumption once again goes down. So our third route was basically to say tracker mortgage payments. So tracker mortgage payments higher, or interest payments, yeah, higher, therefore consumption down. They have less money, basically, yeah? Okay, so clearly consumption is going to go down. And then we could deal with investment, right? Firms, are they going to borrow more money or less money? Well, again, it's more expensive for them to borrow money. The cost of borrowing is now higher because interest rates are higher. Therefore, they're going to borrow less and they're going to invest less. Government spending? What happens to government spending? What do you guys think happens to government spending when interest rates go up? It was a trick question. Nothing happens to government spending. We can assume we shouldn't assume. The government spending is fiscal policy. You ignore it in monetary policy. Just shove it to the side. Leave it. Yeah? And then we will deal with exports minus imports in terms of exchange rates. Okay? And I will do that in a moment. Even though I think this is going to be the best point in the essay, let's just start with micro since we've done the components that I want us to deal with. Do you guys agree? If their interest rates are higher in the economy and people are spending less, from the firm's perspective, is there more or less demand for their good? Obviously less. And do I know how to draw a cost of living diagram where demand decreases? Yes, I do. Do you? Yes, you do. Let's draw it for jokes. Right, let's go. So the topic sentence, by the way, will be this, is one microeconomic effect of higher interest rates may be a fall in profits for, let's say, British firms if it was about the UK. Yeah? And then I would do the following. Before I draw the diagram, it is perfectly okay to develop chunks of your paragraph that are dedicated to micro through a macro lens and then go back to micro. It is, I promise you, have my word, yeah? I have read hundreds, thousands of scripts, yeah? I promise you it's okay, yeah? So I would start off by saying, hey, look, when interest rates are high, people have more incentive to save, as the rate of return is now more attractive. Also, when interest rates are high, the cost of borrowing is high, so individuals are likely to take out fewer loans and decrease their frequency of credit transactions. It's basically expensive to pay back debts, yeah? And then once I do that, I don't do the mortgage one. That's a bit like overkill. I now go, the fall in consumption is likely to translate into lower demand for firms, and thus AR and MR are likely to shift inwards. Let's draw it. Cost slash revenue, quantity is MC. You know what? Let me try to do it as quickly as I can, save time. AR equals D. Let's say R1 equals D1. MR1. Right, I don't know where you guys are and how you're watching this. I am melting in the office. Like, I don't know who turned off the AC, but whoever it is, they're a criminal. I'm dying, but we move. We have to keep going. Right, here's the cost. C1, that's A, and that's B. Okay. Well, we basically said that AR and MR are going to shift inwards, so we just shift it Did you guys notice how I do that, by the way? Sorry, I forgot to mention this. The way that you draw it is if it's shifting inwards or outwards. If it's inwards, you just start at a lower point on the y-axis. Why is it flashing like that? What's going on? Yeah. So you just start at a lower point on the y-axis, like over there, and just shift it parallel. So this is AR2 equals D2, and this is MR2. Okay. Profit maximization, as we know, occurs where MC equals MR. Here's the quantity, Q2. The price, you go up until you hit the new demand curve, which is there. So the price is now lower, P2. And the cost, as you can see on my diagram, can you guys see that Q2, if I go up from Q2, I hit the AC curve, there. It's gone up. That should send alarm bells in your head. Why? Why? Bonus point. Because of the fact that when I now describe the diagram, I can talk about how the prices for the firms are going to go down from P1 to P2. Their sales are likely to fall from Q1 to Q2. Why are their costs going up? It is not diseconomies of scale, by the way, because diseconomies of scale is where average costs are rising as output rises. Output's not rising. But it is less diseconomies of scale. Does that make sense? So it is less diseconomies of scale. In other words, sorry, what am I talking about? It's less economies of scale. I'm clearly tired, yeah? There are less economies of scale for them to tap into because of the fact that they're a smaller firm. Because they're a smaller firm, let's say it's a cafe that's now had to shut down a few of their branches, they can't bulk buy the same quantity as before, yeah? They can't take advantage of like financial economies of scale. I probably do bulk buying, to be honest, yeah? They therefore move away from the MES and therefore productive efficiency goes down. What a paragraph. That's the analysis that I would begin with, yeah? The evaluation that I would do here, if it's decreasing interest rates. So I think the really sensible evaluation or really good evaluation here is to talk about it depends on the firm and the PED for the product, right? Because when people reduce their consumption, it kind of depends on what it is that this good is. So it might be like necessities, like energy, for example. They're probably not going to see much reduction in demand at all, right? So you could talk about that in terms of the impact on profitability is likely to depend on the PED. And then you can bring in some habitual behavior as well, like from theme one, and go, also consumers might be in the habit of consuming that particular thing or going to that shop or that, they have brand loyalty towards that firm. Therefore, they're not going to reduce their demand dramatically. And that therefore is a really good evaluation. Yeah. Is that clear? So that's the micro. Let's do macro. Right. Let me catch my breath. What kind of silliness is going on in the chat? Honestly, I don't even know. Is it pre-recorded? No, I don't know why this comes. How can it be? Anyways, whatever. No, it is not pre-recorded. It's 8:47. Right. And this is my Lucozade. I had a Red Bull earlier as well, like a massive one. Yeah. So honestly, the tank is very low on energy. Right. Let's go and do some work. It actually allows me to revise a topic that I think is like hasn't come up yet and is a very good topic to come up. And that topic is exchange rates. Yeah. So let's just start with the first chain of reasoning. Yeah. The first chain of reasoning is this, is that when interest rates are high, there's a concept that you really need to understand, which is hot money. Yeah. What is hot money? Hot money is basically investors all over the globe. They want to park their money. They basically want to put their money and save their money in the bank accounts that are going to give them the highest rate of return. Yeah. In other words, the banks that give them the best interest rates. So hot money can either flow into an economy or it can flow out of an economy. Well, if interest rates, if they are high, are they going to come into the UK or is hot money going to flow out? Well, do you guys agree that it's going to flow into the economy, right? So what does that mean on a foreign exchange market diagram? Let's draw it. So here's quantity of pounds. And over here, we've got price of pounds in, let's say, dollars. Okay, let's get rid of the term hot money. Cool. Right. Simple supply and demand. And I want you guys to be drawing these for exchange rate questions, yeah? Or if you're doing this as like your analysis. Okay. If investors, let's say, I don't know, an investor from Switzerland, in America, in, I don't know, Luxembourg, whoever, right? They now want to park their money in British bank accounts. How do they do that? Well, they need to sell their currency, whether it's the euro, the dollar, whatever currency it is, and they need to buy pounds. So suddenly there are more consumers of pounds. There are more people demanding pounds. Demand shifts outwards. And as a result, can you guys see that what ends up happening is the pound appreciates? Does that make sense? Okay, so how do we basically deal with that? If the pound appreciates, I always, always, always want you guys to remember when it comes to the current account, Germany, China. Why? China, people buy their products because they are price competitive, they're cheaper. Germany because they are quality competitive. Well, here, if the pound is now stronger, do you guys agree that it means that British goods are now less internationally price competitive? And again, there's an extract. So if it gives you an example of an industry or a firm, don't just say it generically that, oh, British firms become less price competitive. British firms such as Jaguar Land Rover, British firms such as, I don't know, GlaxoSmithKline, whoever the extract's about, right? So you're just going to say, hey, look, the pound appreciates. This makes the UK less internationally price competitive. Exports are therefore likely to go down. Justify why. Other currencies can no longer buy as many pounds. Imports are likely to go up. Why? Because the pound is able to buy more goods and services in the global market. The combination of exports falling and imports rising causes the UK's current account deficit to widen. It gets bigger. It's worse, yeah? And bear in mind, by the way, at that point, that is excellent analysis. That is enough. You could have just done the topic sentence about the current account getting worse. If you've got the time, though, you can extend. And the way you can extend it is to go X minus M is also a component of AD. And therefore, AD is going to shift inwards or may shift inwards. Imports are also a withdrawal from the circular flow of income. And so there's likely to be a negative multiplier effect. You shift AD inwards twice, economic growth goes down, unemployment goes down. Hallelujah. That is our analysis. Easy peasy. Yeah? Every single time. Your currency appreciates, depreciates, devalues, revalues. I don't care. And you made the point, and you should make the point about the current account. You must evaluate with Marshall Lerner. Yeah? And you would say something like this. You go, however, for there to be a worsening of the UK's current account following the appreciation of the pound, the Marshall-Lerner condition must be satisfied. This states that the sum of the price elasticities of exports and imports must be greater than 1. In other words, they need to be elastic. This is because every unit exported out of the UK is now more expensive, whilst every unit imported into the UK is now cheaper. And then with it, you're going to draw the following. I know you guys, I'm sure, have seen the J curve. It's time to do the upside down J curve. Yeah, I'll just call it the curve. On the axes, you're going to have the following. Time on the x-axis and current account on the y-axis, and this is positive and this is negative. Yeah? Okay, let's discuss. So, the UK we know has a trade deficit, so we begin there, where we go, okay, nothing initially has happened, it's just this is what we were. And then the way you develop this is always to say to yourself, whatever I have just said happens in the analysis, to begin with, the opposite happens first. So in our analysis, we just said, hey, the current account's going to get better, going to get worse. So we go, no, no, no. And in the short run, it's going to get better. So we're going to go up and then we're going to go down. And that exact moment there in time is when the currency would have appreciated. So this is appreciation of pound. Okay? And then we need to explain it. And the way we explain it is simply this, is that in the short run, British firms are likely to be tied into trade contracts, and thus the Marshall-Lerner condition is unlikely to be satisfied. As such, the current account is actually likely to improve to begin with. In the long run, the contracts get renegotiated, and provided that the Marshall-Lerner conditions is satisfied, the current account will actually start to worsen. Okay? That is how you answer that question about interest rates going up. Yeah? Right. Let's say they wanted to try and be a little bit evil. Yeah, it's not that evil. But it would say something like evaluate the microeconomic and macroeconomic effects, or something like the negative microeconomic and macroeconomic effects of the Bank of England when the Bank of England tried to control inflation. Okay, well, what is that question? It's exactly the question we just did. Because what you could do is, okay, when they're trying to control inflation because inflation is too high, they're going to set the interest rate up. And it just becomes this. You go, oh, it's really bad for firms because, like the AR and MR is going to shift inwards. It's really bad for the current account because of the fact that, we're becoming less price competitive. It's the same answer. I need you to just notice that was the same question asked in a slightly different way. And that's how you answer it. Right, let's go. Where are we? What have we done? What's left to do? All right, you know what? Since we're actually on that topic, let's go and deal with it. In the 2024 paper, paper two, they had a question about policies that could be used to correct Brazil's current account deficit. Yeah? Okay, let's use the same question, but this time make it micro and macro. So the question would be this. Evaluate microeconomic and macroeconomic policies that could be used to reduce Brazil's current account deficit. Another name for a current account deficit, by the way, is trade deficit. Is that really clear? Okay. Can I just whiz through some revision first, and then we will do it together, yeah? If you remember a second ago, I basically said to you guys that The current account, whenever you're dealing with it, I want you to remember China and Germany. China because they're cheap, they're price competitive. Germany because they're quality competitive. And if you can basically make the Brazilian economy more price competitive or more quality competitive or both, you are totally fixing this problem. You're going to basically achieve what the objective is, yeah? Okay, there are four broad strategies that can be used to answer this question from a macro perspective, and then we're going to make it micro. Number one, the first is that we can devalue the real. And we'll talk about how they do that because that's definitely going to be one of our points, yeah? Number two is they can adopt something called expenditure reducing policies. Right, what does that mean? Expenditure reducing policies are policies intended to reduce how much people spend in the economy, because if they spend less, they'll spend less on domestic goods, but they'll also spend less on imports. So the current account deficit will shrink. Yeah. How do I do that? Well, I could raise income tax. If I raise income tax in Brazil, people in Brazil have less income. They can't afford to buy as many imports. Happy days. The current account gets better. The alternative, or the other way that I could do it, is the central bank, could raise the interest rates. Because if I raise interest rates, people save rather than spend. Demand for imports again goes down. Yeah. Again, we'll evaluate and deal with all these, the one I want to choose in a second. Number three is called expenditure switching. All right. Expenditure switching is where I'm trying to basically incentivize um, individuals in the Brazilian economy to switch from buying foreign products and buying more domestic products. Expenditure switching has another name that you definitely know. It's called protectionism. Yeah. So that is number three. And finally, number four is supply side policies. Yeah. So we've got so many choices here, whether it's education and training, whether it's, I don't know, whichever one. Yeah. So I went through loads of them at the beginning of this live and went through how you can make them into micro points. Yeah. For the purposes of this particular question, yeah, the two that I'm going to pick is definitely this on a macro level. And the reason I'm going to pick this is because of the depth that we can offer and the theory we can show off with. And the evaluation is exceptional. We know it. Marshall and J-curve, yeah. And then for the micro side of things, I'm going to do this. And specifically, what I'm going to do is a form of protectionism that you all know I'm going to subsidize. I'm going to give them a subsidy. Yeah? Let's deal with the question. So it would read, or you'd write it in the following way. It would be something like, one macroeconomic policy that Brazil could use to correct their trade deficit is to devalue their currency. Okay? Again, there is an extract. And if there is an extract, and let's just say, I don't know, if it's about Brazil, hypothetically, by the way, I'm making it up. I do not know. Yeah. I can show you, for example, what they gave you in the 2024 paper as like a little stem before the question. And it looked like this. It literally told you how much they were doing. Here, there you go. So it says in 2021, Brazil's current account deficit on the balance of payments was $46.12 billion. The Central Bank of Brazil intervened to sell its own currency, the real, on September 23rd, 2022. This was the first time it had intervened in foreign currency markets since December 2021. So anyways, if I were doing this and I'm devaluing the currency, this is a big clue that you can do it. You would literally quote the fact that the central bank did it on September 23rd, 2022. Yeah. And yeah. Okay. They've already told us how they do it, but let's just go through it because it's important theoretically. If you're going to devalue the currency, I need to make sure you know how to devalue the currency. You can't just say, oh, they devalue the currency. It is really clear on the mark scheme, by the way, that they go, devaluation of a currency is valid as long as they're not part of, by the way, a monetary union, in which case, invalid. Yeah. It is valid, even if they're, by the way, on a floating exchange rate, they can turn to becoming a managed exchange rate where they intervene from time to time. So just because they're on a floating exchange rate doesn't mean they can't do this. So they can. But it says specifically that you can only do this point if you explain the mechanism by which they achieve it. So let's understand it. Every single economy has a stock of what are called foreign reserves, yeah? And foreign reserves are fancy ways of saying other currencies, yeah? So foreign reserves are things like, dollars, yen, euro, pounds for Brazil, yeah? These are all examples of foreign reserves, yeah? And the foreign reserves are really useful because you can use them to basically make your currency stronger or weaker. So let's understand it. What do I want to do to my currency? Well, if I'm the central bank in Brazil, I want to make it weaker. So here's a quantity of real, and this is the price of real in, let's say, dollars. Oh no, my screen lost connection. That's so annoying. Right, while I reconnect it, that's so annoying. What I want us to, oh man. Okay, right, let me say it out loud. So in a nutshell, if they suddenly now want to make the currency weaker, they can only do one of two things. They can either buy their currency and then sell foreign reserves, or they can sell their currency and buy foreign reserves. Think about it from a supply and demand perspective. From a supply and demand perspective, if I want to make my currency weaker, do we accept that I'm going to need to sell it? Yeah, I think the board is back. There we go. Honestly, technology is just so rubbish. Yeah, I need to sell my currency. So here we go. This is S1. This is D1. So I need to shift supply outwards. Because if I shift supply outwards by selling it, can you guys see the currency gets weaker? It devalues. Okay. And this is Q2. So if I'm selling a real, I have to be doing the opposite with my foreign reserves. In other words, the Brazilian central bank will be buying foreign reserves. Okay. And then as soon as you've done that, you're flying because suddenly you now know the Brazilian economy is now more price competitive. If they're more price competitive, what happens? They can export more because other currencies can now buy more real. Imports, again, if they've given you an industry of a firm or like, mention it. Imports are likely to fall. Again, why? Why are imports falling? Because other currencies, the real, cannot buy as much in the global market now. Yeah? The combination of rising exports and falling imports helps to reduce Brazil's current account deficit. Now, be careful for a question like this. Oh, I can't screen's gone again. It doesn't matter. Yeah. So be careful for a question like this because it's very tempting to then go and say, oh, X minus M is a component of AD and AD is going to shift outwards. But that is not answering the question anymore. So if you start yapping on about like, the current account affecting aggregate demand, you're not actually answering the question anymore. So don't go that far. Just stop at the point where the current account got better. The evaluation, hopefully you all know. The evaluation is Marshall Lerner and J-curve. Why? Because of the fact that in the short run, firms in Brazil are tied into trade contracts. So to begin with, the current account is actually getting better, not worse. Yeah. And so you draw it, it'll be a J, and that is your first analysis. Hopefully very, very straightforward. Yeah. That is analysis number one. Yeah. Let's do micro. And I purposely wanted to do subsidies because I think it's easier to develop and easier to evaluate as well. So the topic sentence will read like this. It will be one microeconomic factor or policy that could be used to reduce Brazil's current account deficit is to subsidize Brazilian firms. Okay. Once you've done that, you now explain the following. You go, a subsidy is a grant given by the government to producers which would decrease their cost of production, resulting in lower prices and higher output. What do you now do? Well, now you basically draw the diagram with MC and AC falling. I've drawn it, I think 1,000 times today, yeah? You draw it and then let's like zoom into the key things that you need to now discuss as part of the analysis, yeah? So the key points that we want to address as part of our analysis here is as follows. If you can draw the diagram or visualize it, you can go back to the stream where I drew it earlier. One of the key things that we mention or show is that prices go down. Remember what I said? I said to you guys that forevermore, when you're dealing with the current account and how to improve the current account, always think in terms of price or quality. Well, do we agree that their prices going down makes them more price competitive? Simple as that. So you go, hey, the prices are lower, which increases allocative efficiency, increases consumer surplus, and it makes the Brazilian firms more globally price competitive. Amazing. Therefore, that will allow them to export more in the global market. Yeah. Then you can talk about how their profits are going to go up. Why? You could talk about the area, P1 ABC1, P2 DEC2, all of that. And then what can they do with the profits? Well, they can innovate. They can invest into new technology. And by investing into new technology, what does that do? It makes them more price and quality competitive, which further allows them to export more in the global market. And so these firms becoming more globally competitive helps to reduce Brazil's current account deficit. Does that make sense? Yeah. That is the analysis, and it's exceptional analysis. Yeah. Right. The evaluation that I think is really, really good. I think the evaluation that is amazing here is to basically be speaking about how it could trigger a trade war. Because protectionist policy, subsidies are a protectionist policy. And if countries retaliate by imposing, let's say, a tariff on your firms, what does that do? Well, a tariff increases the variable cost for your firms because now they're having to pay a tax to be able to sell their good into your economy, right? And that translates into their cost potentially going up. So it offsets the subsidy. It might not be that great that the government is subsidizing them. If they place a quota on your firms, that limits their ability to sell into the market, that foreign market, all of which just means the current account, it might not get better. And actually, what will determine whether it gets better or worse at that point is simply the PED for the good that they're selling. If it's elastic, so let's say that what they're selling into the like that economy, who's now put up a tariff on them, is elastic, they're going to suffer big time because their export earnings are going to go down pretty dramatically. Does that make sense? That is how you deal with that question, and happy days for you because that is literally how you answer it. Yeah? Okay, right. I think I've managed to reconnect my silly board. It's so annoying, but let's see how long it lasts. Right, what other topics are we on? So that's another 25 marker. Hopefully that made sense. And let's do another one. Right, that page. Right, what's on my list? All right. Let's say they want to be a little bit evil. It's all good. We got it. Yeah. Let's say the question says this: evaluate the microeconomic and macroeconomic effects of interventionist strategies to promote economic development. No problemo. Right, so interventionist. Okay. Am I allowed to be a dictator? Because I know there are a lot of different interventionist strategies that you could use to promote development, and I'm sure the data will also have interventionist strategies that they mention. It's a pretty good idea to use theirs anyway. But there are three strategies that I need you to know. There are three strategies that are all considered to be interventions. By the way, another name for interventionist, in the event they use that name, is inward-looking strategies. Yeah, whereas market-orientated strategies are outward-looking strategies. And what we mean by interventionist is the government is trying to grow the economy from within. Yeah. So, in a nutshell, these are your three. Number one is non-negotiable. It's the one that I always want you to do, which is education and training. Okay. The government can invest into education and training programs. Okay. That's one. Number two, a second interventionist strategy is protectionism. And finally, number three, even though I think the first two are the best ones, is improving infrastructure. I need you to know about the third one in the event that the extract is very heavy on this. So, for example, June 2023, paper two is all about how there's loads of investment into infrastructure in Angola and TNCs are setting up all that. So maybe they talk about infrastructure a lot, in which case, by all means, then use infrastructure as like the interventionist strategy that you develop. Yeah. Right. Let's chat. Let's make one of them. I'm going to make all of them micro, to be honest, yeah. But the one I'm going to make micro is this, is education and training. And I did it earlier in the stream. Do you guys agree that if the government invests into education and training programs, that will result in productivity levels going up? It will result in unit labor costs going down. This therefore means that variable costs for the firms go down. Do you see how repetitive this is, yeah? So how do I structure it in terms of my sentence? It would be something like this. One microeconomic effect of interventionist strategies to promote economic development is higher profits for firms in whichever country it's in. Let's say the Ivory Coast, yeah? So you say that. Then the second sentence is now identifying which strategy we're dealing with. An interventionist strategy that the government are adopting is investing into education and training programs. Quote from the data, give me some application. And now you go. This is likely to result in higher levels of efficiency and productivity amongst the workforce and thus lower unit labor costs. You then talk about how variable costs go down for the firm, MC and AC go down, draw it, go crazy, enjoy your life. Yeah. Evaluation to that is that it's a huge time lag. This is not a quick fix. This is not like a solution to achieving like some rapid growth and development because it's going to take ages. Yeah. That would work really well. Yeah. You could also have gone down the route of saying it's really expensive, fiscal deficit up, national debt up, credit rating down, and that's problematic for these economies. It just increases their debt load. Yeah. That's our first analysis. Now we do macro. And from a macro perspective, I probably would do protectionism. And I would speak about how protectionist policies like a tariff, a quota, what it does is it protects infant industries. And in developing economies, these firms are too small to be able to fully tap into the economies of scale that exist in that industry. If there were therefore free trade, the TNCs would either export their products or just set up in that economy and annihilate the competition, right? There would be loads of unemployment. There will be practically no domestic firms in the market with any meaningful market share. That's not great. So what should we do? We should place protectionist policies. And by protecting these firms, it means that consumers in the economy begin to switch away from the foreign companies to buying more domestic products, right? It means because there's more demand for goods and services in the economy, then labor that being derived demand results in cyclical unemployment going down, right? Because they're going to hire more workers. All of this translates into the country growing from within. Living standards are going up, and so you could talk about the HCI ranking rising. How do I evaluate that? I think the best way to evaluate it is with the best diagram in the whole of the course, which is the tariff diagram. Let's go through the tariff diagram, but I need Lucasade first. Right, okay. We are what? 2 hours and 10 minutes in. How are you guys doing? Are you coping? Right. Honestly, I really should have brought a fan to the office today. I didn't realize the AC would not be working. QP. Right. I'm going to do this from the perspective of the Ivory Coast. Yeah. I'm just making up an example of a developing economy. Yeah. So let's say this is S. I mean, I really could have chosen a better economy than the Ivory Coast, but we've committed now. So let's do it. So S Ivory Coast and, oh, for goodness sake, I'm going to have to write it again. D Ivory Coast. Sometimes I make really bad decisions. Right there. Okay, the first thing that you need to know on this diagram is that you set a world price, and the world price must be set below the equilibrium. The logic of why, by the way, is that we need this firm or this country, sorry, to be an importer of the good. Yeah. So this is the world price, WP1, and this is world supply. Okay. At that world supply, do we agree that it hits domestic supply over here? Domestic supply is really, really low. Why is it so low? Well, the price is not very attractive. So firms in the Ivory Coast will make some of this good, but not very much of it because it's not worth it. Demand, on the other hand, is all the way over here. Consumers are like, whoa, this is so cheap. I love this good. If I make up numbers, imagine that number was 30 and that number was 60. Sorry, 90. Yeah? Do you guys agree that that means that only 30 units of the good are being made in the Ivory Coast, but consumers want 90 of it? There is a shortfall of 60. Where do they buy it from? Well, they buy it from overseas. What is that called? It's called an import. So the distance between Q1 and Q2 is M1, it's imports. Cool. Now the government imposed a tariff on the market. So what does that do? It does this. This is the world supply plus the tariff, and this is world price too. Same exercise. Well, now domestic supply is going to increase. There's going to be an extension along the supply curve from Q1 to Q3 because of the fact that they firms in the economy have more incentive to make the good at the higher price. Consumers, on the other hand, can't afford to buy as much of it. And so that distance between Q3 and Q4 is M2. Does that make sense? And then finally, we need to just label a couple of things. So A, B, C, and D. Is that clear? Amazing. Right. This is a great, great diagram to know about because this diagram illustrates several things. Hopefully you all know, and if you don't, please go watch my video on YouTube of me going through this entire diagram, protectionism, the topic. It's a very useful video to revise off, but in a nutshell, consumer surplus is going down by A, B, C, D. And so as an evaluation, you could say, hey, living standards in the economy are going to deteriorate, and that this is not the best strategy to promote development. An alternative route that you could also go down, by the way, is to say that if they're imposing protectionism, if there is now a tariff placed on, let's say, a raw material, that increases the cost of production for the firms in the economy. So actually, their costs going up results in their profits going down, and so actually they might end up shutting down. So it kind of backfires, yeah? But I think the easiest way to do this, by the way, is just simply drawing this and going, consumer surplus goes down by A, B, C, D. Consumers are clearly worse off, yeah? Happy days for all of us, right? Lovely. I could have also, by the way, spoken about maybe a trade war that could be instigated as a result of protectionist policies, but I feel like this is slightly better when it comes to development because you can clearly show that living standards are going down. That links more nicely into development. Whereas if we were dealing with it in terms of how to correct a trade deficit, yeah, then trade war is the way to go, as I did earlier with when I subsidized the firms, yeah? Okay, right, we can take that off. If we were doing infrastructure, by the way, I mean, I don't mind whether it's the micro point or the macro point, but I think you could talk about infrastructure in terms of the mobility of labor. Labor becomes more geographically mobile. So if, for example, the roads are like smoother, there's less like, breakdowns, there's better train networks, all of that, you can basically speak about it in terms of, hey, look, variable costs for the firms are going to go down. So I can make that my micro point, right? Develop it, as always, variable costs going down, you've got a million things to say. And then you can evaluate it with externalities and go, hey, look, like the building of the infrastructure is going to be pretty bad for the environment, pretty bad. Yeah. All right. Another one. Evaluate microeconomic and macroeconomic effects of market orientated strategies to promote development. Okay. So we did interventionist. Let's do market based. Right. I don't know about you guys. I am tired, but let's just try and keep going. Again, can I be a dictator? Can I choose the market-orientated strategies that I prefer you guys to be focusing your energy on? Number one, trade liberalization. Okay? Trade liberalization. And number two? Number two is we can now do, what's it called? Reduction in corporation tax. And we want to basically talk about how it's going to attract FDI. Okay? We're going to link it to foreign direct investment. Okay, I think personally, This one is slightly easier to develop on a macro level. So I'm going to make this my macro, and this is going to be my micro. Okay, let's do it really quickly. The starting point is this: is one macroeconomic effect, one macroeconomic effect of market-oriented strategies to promote economic growth and development is higher levels of growth. Yeah. You would then basically say the strategy. So you go, one market-oriented strategy that could be used is reducing corporation tax. And then you say the following. You go, if firms in the economy can retain more of their profits, they are likely to invest. And because of the reduction in corporation tax, it is likely to attract more foreign direct investment. Now you have a choice, by the way. You can either go down the route of talking about how TNCs, it may be in their interest to improve the infrastructure. And if the extract says that, by the way, that's probably a good route to go down. And then you can develop it in terms of, what's good about infrastructure improving. There are external economies of scale. The LRAS curve is going to shift out. You got all of that. But if it doesn't say that, and you need to save a bit of time, I got you. Because you remember that investment is a component of AD. So AD is going to shift out. It's also an injection into the circular flow of income. And so there's going to be a positive multiplier effect. And the positive multiplier effect is enormous in a developing economy because the MPC is kind of high. And then you develop that, draw the diagram, economic growth goes up, living standards go up, HDI ranking up. Just enjoy life, yeah, within reason, within time limits, yeah. I can't emphasize enough. Do not overwrite. You need to make sure that you're doing it within time limits, yeah. Eval. The evaluation, I can do several things. One of the evaluations you could talk about is that TNC setting up in the economy is really, really bad for domestic firms. They may be driven out of the market, and the TNC may establish itself as a monopoly. That could be a potential analysis. You could speak about how the TNCs may end up repatriating profits, right? What does that mean? Okay. If they repatriate profits, it basically means they send their profits back out of the country, so back to normally where their home country is, where most of the shareholders are. But that's an outflow, by the way, of investment income on the current account. And so that translates into their current account for that economy potentially getting worse. Yeah? Make sense? Those are the kind of things that I would probably be doing here in terms of like the evaluations. Yeah? You could also have spoken about like externalities and like you could draw negative externality. You could speak about widening income inequality, by the way, like the TNC might come in, exploit the workers like crazy. And so you can draw a Lorenz curve, shift it out, the Gini coefficient goes up. Yeah? Trade liberalization. How do I do it from a micro perspective? Well, what is trade liberalization to begin with? Trade liberalization is where a country removes barriers to trade. They engage in free trade. They maybe join a trading bloc, right? And so there's two ways that I can basically develop this. One way is this. So I'm going to go and say, okay, if a firm joins, or not, sorry, if a country joins a trading bloc, so if it says it in the extract they join a trading bloc, that is what I now talk about. But if they basically join a trading bloc, do you agree that their firms can now sell to a wider market more easily? So AR and MR might shift outwards. You can do it that way. The alternative is to say, hey, if they basically have trade liberalization and they engage in free trade with other countries, variable costs will go down. And the reason why variable costs will go down is because before they would have had to pay a tariff, they would have had to pay a tax in order for them to sell their good in that country. They no longer have to pay the tax. And if they no longer have to pay the tax, the variable costs go down, MC and AC goes down, you know what to do from that, yeah? I would do that as my analysis. My evaluation, I think, is the fact that they become too interdependent. That if they kind of liberalize trade, there's a real danger that now, if their main trading partners experience an economic downturn, it's very likely to spill over and negatively impact those firms because suddenly now those firms are going to struggle to sell their goods and export their products into that country, and so their profits might end up going down. So it's not a good idea. Clear? Yeah. Again, by the way, any of the bad things about globalization, I could have done here as well. I could have talked about how, environmental degradation because of more trade and stuff like that. That also works. Yeah. All right. Cool. We're nearly at the end. I just want to do a few more things. I want to show you guys the locked specimen paper. Let's go and open it together. Paper 3, locked specimen, looks like this. And I want to actually begin with the 8 marker, yeah, not the 12 or 25 marker. We will do one of the 25 markers in a second, but let's start with the 8 marker. The 8 marker says, with reference to figures 1 and extract A, examine the likely reasons for the fall in oil prices since the middle of 2014. Okay, I have a question for you guys. Is this a micro or macro question? I'll give you guys a second. I'll actually for the only time ever, I'm gonna look at the chat. Yeah, let's see what you guys write. Other than the deranged comments that are written on the chat all the time. What is wrong with you guys? Is this micro or is this macro? Okay, have a look. So the correct answer is that this is micro. Now, I know that there's a temptation to think of it as macro. And if it was effects of oil prices going up or down, yeah, for sure, it's macro. It is not an effect question. It's a cause. It's the reasons why the price of it has gone, in this case, it's gone, I think, down. Yeah. So, in a nutshell, I need you guys to understand that. Why is that important? Because you automatically then should be thinking if the price of an individual item, in this case, oil, is going down, that can only occur through supply and demand. There's no other way. Yeah. And therefore, it is either supply shifting outwards or demand shifting inwards. And that makes my life so much easier because now I can find the points a lot quicker. I know what I'm looking for. Yeah. There's one more thing, by the way, to be wary of here, where they sometimes are so annoying because the application, can you see it's asking for the reference from figure one and extract A? You would get capped in terms of application if you do not reference figure one. Do you know the best thing to do? Reference it immediately. Just do it straight away. Yeah. You basically just go according to figure one, and let's look at figure one. Yeah. Here's figure one. Can we see it? Here's figure one. And by the way, can I show you one more thing that they've done that is evil? It's just unnecessary, honestly. Can you see that figure one, by the way, begins around 2011-ish? Yeah. But the question is specifically since the middle of 2014. If you therefore start quoting from 2011, you're not quoting the correct period. Yeah? You need to quote from the middle of 2014. And it would be like this. According to figure one, the price of oil has fallen from around $115 per barrel in the middle of 2014 to around $60 at the end of 2014. That is your first application mark. Get it out of the way immediately because you're likely to forget. So when it says like figure, go. Give me the figure immediately. Yeah? And now we're looking for factors. Can I show you how easy it is to spot these now? Yeah. Look at this. The entirety of this paragraph is literally telling me the answer. Oil prices are falling because of changes in world supply and demand. Demand has slowed because Europe's growth has been weak. Cool. Right. Let's write up the topic sentence and write out the 3 marks. If an 8 marker, I want it to be like this. Bullet points. Yeah. It would be like this. One reason why the price of oil has fallen is due to a fall in demand. Topic sentence. That's a knowledge mark. Second thing I need to do is application. According to extract A, quote, demand has slowed because Europe's growth has been weak. Easy peasy. That's my second mark. Then I simply explain it in really simple terms. You go, if a fall in demand in Europe would mean that there is less demand for oil as oil is used for the manufacturing process in countries such as Germany. Given this, demand is likely to shift inwards. So that's one paragraph, yeah? Now we're looking for factors that cause supply to shift down. Now, all of this, by the way, there's a lot of like supply factors here, but because I've read the extract, we're going to skip to where actually it's at. And it's oh, it's here, sorry. Yeah? This. Look at that. Saudi Arabia is flooding the world with oil, which is driving the world price lower. Do you guys agree that shifts out supply? Bear in mind, by the way, if it were two different factors causing demand to shift inwards, that is entirely valid as two separate factors. So it doesn't have to be that it's one demand and one supply. In this case, it was, so you should do both factors, but just so you know, different factors could be like shifting the same curve. That's okay, yeah? So again, how would I write this? The topic sentence would be, another reason why oil prices may be falling is due to an increase in supply. According to extract A, boom. Saudi Arabia is flooding the world with oil, which is driving the world price lower. That's your application mark. And now you just explain it. You go, Saudi Arabia are one of the world's biggest exporters of oil. And thus, when they sell a lot of oil or they increase their supply of oil, the supply of oil on the global market shifts outwards from S1 to S2. I promise you, by the way, you already have 6 out of 6 analysis marks. But to be extra safe, like super extra safe, it's not that necessary. But can I just show you the diagram? In case it's a 5 marker and you need to draw the diagram. When there are two shifts, as there are here, this is how I want you to draw it. So here's price and quantity. So here's S1. Here is D1. Okay. Oh, and by the way, let's be super geeky. How do we be super geeky? We're writing P1. P1? We're writing $115, mate. Yeah? Because we know. We know figure one. We know. We've seen it. Yeah? And then we said, hey, supply is going to shift outwards because of Saudi Arabia. They're flooding the world with oil. So like that. S2. And demand is shifting inwards, like let's say there. Yeah? And finally, the last equilibrium is all you need to label. You need to label the initial equilibrium where S1 and D1 intersect, and the final equilibrium where S2 and D2 intersect. This is Q2, and this, the same P2. No. This is $60. Yeah? Do you get it? That would be the absolute 1,000,000% nail to get the 6 out of 6. In truth, though, you already got 6 out of 6 analysis before doing this, yeah? But I think this is like what? A 10-second job? You could do it really quickly, and therefore I don't mind you doing it, yeah? We need one evaluation. And the evaluation typically is when prices are going down, you can go, oh, it's temporary, it might go back up. And I said to you guys that there are clues. There are clues upon clues upon clues. Look for the clues. Let's find the clue. Look at the 12 marker. The 12 marker is with reference to extract A, discuss the factors necessary for the success of a what? Of a cartel. What's a cartel? A cartel is where they basically collude, where prices eventually go up. In other words, you go, oh, this might be temporary. Because the main oil producing countries, they're called OPEC, may simply form a cartel and raise the price, in which case prices go back up. It might just be temporary. Yeah? Make sense? So that would be how you get the A marks out of it. Yeah? All right. There is one question in here that I definitely want to do, and it is the 25 marker question D. It says, with reference to the information provided and your own knowledge, evaluate the microeconomic and macroeconomic effects of a sustained period of deflation. I need Lucozade before we do this. Right, I need loads of Lucozade. Mr. Elahi, thank you for this. Right, I'm not gonna lie, I wish I bought a second Red Bull at this point, but let's chat. So, can we do some revision first? Let us revise about what deflation is and why deflation is really, really bad for the economy. Deflation, in a nutshell, is where prices are falling. So the general price level is decreasing, which sounds wonderful. It is not wonderful. And the reason why it is typically not wonderful is because of the fact that people's expectations regarding future prices are based on what they observe today. If they therefore see prices going down today, they anticipate and expect that prices will keep going down tomorrow. They therefore withhold spending, especially on what we call big ticket items, like a car or a house, right? Now, on a macro level, by the way, if people are not spending as much on houses because they're waiting for bargain prices, what does that do to house prices? Well, house prices now start to go down. And if house prices start to go down, what do people experience? Hopefully, you know they experience a negative wealth effect. And if they experience a negative wealth effect, they are less confident. Consumer confidence decreases. If consumer confidence decreases, consumption, the biggest component of AD, goes down. AD shifts inwards. Economic growth goes down. Unemployment goes up because labor is derived demand. So the cyclical unemployment is now rising, right? And if unemployment is rising and people are losing their jobs, they're spending even less money. And therefore, you get more deflation and you get into a vicious spiral that is really, really hard to get out of, yeah? That, therefore, is in a nutshell the main issues that you've got when it comes to deflation. Right. I want us to start with macro. Even though I think in this paragraph, in my mind that I've thought about it, the micro that we're going to do is going to be so monstrous, but we'll do that in a second. Yeah. The macro, it is perfectly okay to do the exact same concept and point from a micro lens as you do from a macro lens. So, for example, if you were stuck, and it's okay, it will really get high marks, you get full marks doing this, and you wanted to talk about a negative wealth effect because people's expectations and consumption falling, and you were going to do that as AR and MR shifting inwards, and if you were doing it as consumption falling and AD shifting inwards, entirely valid. You can do that. Yeah, I need you to understand that that is plausible. It's okay. It's perfectly okay. Yeah. We're not going to, but we could have. Just to be clear, you could have gone down the route if it's easier for you to understand it in the way of going, hey, people's expectations regarding future prices are based on what they observe today. Yeah? We're going to make it crazy level. And the way we're going to make it crazy level is this. And actually, by the way, I may have actually gone through this maybe in the paper 2 live stream as a concept. I can't remember, to be honest. I don't remember what I went through. But ignore deflation for a second. Yeah, actually, no, don't ignore deflation. One of the problems of deflation is what happens to the real value of your debt. Let's make sense of it with a really basic example. Imagine I owe you £100. That is my debt. Okay, so this is the debt I owe you. Yeah. And to begin with, let's assume that a chocolate bar in the economy costs £1. Okay. Now suddenly, I still owe you in nominal terms £100. But a chocolate bar, because of deflation, is now only worth 50p. Do you guys agree that the debt that I owe you is now worth double? It is worth 200 chocolate bars, whereas before it was worth 100 chocolate bars. So what happens? What translates in is that whenever there's deflation, countries, the real value of their debt is going up. June 2016, Unit 4, question 5 is about how debt to GDP for Italy is rising. And one of the reasons why it's rising is they're experiencing deflation. That's a disaster. Yeah. So the overarching point is that they're experiencing deflation, and so the real value of their debt is going up. Yeah. Now, if you look at the extract, by the way, in the figures, they kind of allude to something. Because if you look at whose inflation and deflation they've shown us, it's the Eurozone. So I can now speak about countries like Italy. Italy's debt as a proportion of GDP is around 150%, give or take, yeah? So if the value of their debt in real terms is increasing, that is a massive problem. But we're not done. There is more depth here. Why is there more depth here? Because think about what policy tool you would need to use to try and get out of deflation. What do you need to do to get out of deflation? Well, do we agree that we need to set a low interest rate? Why? Because if interest rates are low, the cost of borrowing is low, so people will borrow more money and spend more. Firms will borrow more money and invest more. And AD would shift out, and you might get demand pull inflation. Okay, but the problem is that the Eurozone, Italy, they're part of the Eurozone. Can they set their own interest rates? No, they can't. That's a problem. But we're not done yet. It's already a problem, but then you're told in the extract the following. It says, and if you were sitting the paper by the way around the time when the lock specimen, the first iteration of this paper would have come out, you'd have known this. If you look at, for example, June 2017, paper two, you know what? Let's do that really quickly so I can show you. So we're like, okay, so just to clarify and recap what we've done so far, yeah? So we're basically saying, hey, look, it's going to increase the real value of Italy's debt, yeah? Because deflation increases the real value of debt. That is already a problem. And then to make matters worse, they're part of the Eurozone, so they can't even set their own interest rates. Ideally for them, the interest rate would be low, yeah? Okay, watch this. Where is it? Here we go. June 2017, paper two. Oh, I was on paper two. So we're like, yeah, it's Italy. We really need them to have a low interest rate. Like it would be great if they have a low interest rate because then that will shift AD out and we get all what we need. And here we go. The ECB cut its base rate by 0.1% to minus 0.3%. What are Italy experiencing? Italy are clearly experiencing a liquidity trap, and that is sensational analysis. Yeah, it basically means that monetary policy just stops working. If you get to a point where interest rates are already basically near zero, and you start to do things like quantitative easing, it's at that point where realistically commercial banks have already set their interest rates to their lower limit, and they do not care what you do. Yeah. If this is not super duper clear, by the way, at the beginning of the live stream, I believe for paper two, I went through quantitative easing, yeah, and I did this evaluation in detail, yeah. So you want to go back and watch that if you haven't understood this. But in a nutshell, you're saying, hey, they are in big trouble. They can't even get out of deflation because they've probably set interest rates already super low. And you know what? The extract. Remember how paper three extracts help? This helps so much. It says this. It says, despite record low interest rates and the wholesale application of quantitative easing, central banks in major developed economies are struggling to meet inflation, to make inflation meet statutory targets. Statutory targets, by the way, means legal targets. Like, the UK target is like 2% plus or minus 1%. What a quote, yeah? And if that quote is too long for you, don't worry about it. I got you another quote, yeah? You could talk about it here. Once interest rates reach zero, it is virtually impossible. And they're basically at zero. And so what you say is this, you go, one macroeconomic effect of a sustained period of deflation is that it increases the real value of debt. Italy's debt to GDP ratio of 150% is likely to increase in real value. You quote figure two, by the way, to show that Eurozone inflation was deflationary at that point, right? And you say to make matters worse, Italy are part of the Eurozone, so they can't even set their own interest rates. Nonetheless, the interest rate set by the European Central Bank was 0% and negative at times. And they adopted quantitative easing. The fact that they are still experiencing deflation then suggests that Italy are experiencing a liquidity trap. It's a major cause for concern. We should basically be worried. Yeah? That's the analysis. Let's evaluate. Now, the evaluation, by the way, it comes from, again, when you do more past papers, the more past papers that you guys do, the more points you'll pick up. If I now show you guys June 2016, Unit 4, really quickly. And by the way, this shows you, like, you guys think I know all these things about, like, Italy and, like, whatever. No, it's all from past papers, yeah? June 2016, Italia. Right. Okay. All right. Where, oh, here we go. So, by the way, just to be clear, this extract about Italy, here you go. It says this: the fall in the general price level in Italy is raising the real value of debt. That is the point we just made, yeah? And when they say the fall in the general price level, what is that? That's deflation, yeah? And where did I get my stat about the 100? There you go, right? Anyways, The extract actually provides us with an with the solution to the problem. And the solution here really is to say, okay, if you think about it, they can't really do much more on the monetary side, but they still have control over fiscal policy. And therefore, even though it's going to increase their debt to begin with, they need to spend. They need to spend or they need to cut taxes. Like they badly need to shift AD out. It is really, really problematic. Yeah. So if we now look at the extract, it goes here. It goes boom. Italy needs to bring its taxes down to the Eurozone average. Okay, so the evaluation is, however, Italy may be able to escape this trap through expansionary fiscal policy. And by the way, again, clue upon clue upon clue. That year, the following year, the 15 marker, paper two, is expansionary, or they call it loose fiscal policy, to stimulate growth in the Eurozone. This is expansionary fiscal policy. This is loose fiscal policy. Yeah. So you go, they could use loose fiscal policy or expansionary fiscal policy. You could talk about how they could reduce their tax rates. If they reduce their tax rates, do you guys agree that that means that Italians have more disposable income? Yeah. Gianluigi is happy now. Yeah. He's got money. He spends his money. Consumption goes up. AD shifts out. And now watch this. Let's draw it. Hopefully my board is still alive. Is my board alive? Yes, my board is alive. Okay, good. Let's draw it because I want to show you guys something. But actually, very quickly before I draw it, can I just explain debt as a proportion of GDP in terms of the mathematics, like the concept, yeah? Here's debt, here's GDP. Okay, let's assume that your country's debt is £100 and your GDP to begin with is £100, yeah? What is your debt as a proportion of your GDP? It's 100%, right? Now, imagine hypothetically that your debt remains £100, but your GDP now goes up to £200. What is your debt as a proportion of GDP now? It's now 50%. Does that make sense? So park that thought because you'll see when I draw the diagram, two very good things are hopefully going to happen for Italy. Let's draw it. So if they reduce taxes and people spend more in the economy, hopefully it shifts our aggregate demand. I'm sure up here, I can't bother to write price level. Here's LRAS. Right. AD1. Y1. P1. Okay. Are you guys still with me? Are you? I don't even know if anyone's still in the live. You guys probably fallen asleep. Talking to myself. Right, here's P2. Okay, two things are now happening. Number one. Number one is, did you see that economic growth occurs? And the example I gave you guys earlier was to explain this concept. If economic growth increases, the debt as a proportion of GDP decreases. And can you see that they also get demand pull inflation, so it might lift them out of deflation, so the real value of their debt might start to come down. Yeah, that is our analysis and evaluation on the macro side, and it is exceptional. Yeah. Now, I have to tell you guys, yeah, you need to be braced. I think what we're about to do as our micro analysis and especially the evaluation is so damn good, yeah, that like you might lose your mind. Let's deal with it. Remember how I said that people's expectations regarding future prices are based on what they observe today? And the extract, by the way, does a really good job of explaining this as well. So then you can incorporate the data. I'll show you guys some quotes in a second. But in a nutshell, if people are going to withhold spending, there is going to be a lack of demand for goods and services. A lack of demand for goods and services means that AR and MR is going to shift in, and I want to contextualize it. And the contextualization that we're going to give is car companies. Give me a car company. I'm going to do like BMW because hopefully you can all spell BMW. Yeah, spell like this. Okay. Right. Anyways, so let's go through it. The overarching point is one microeconomic effect of a sustained period of deflation may be lower profits for car manufacturing firms such as BMW. And now you explain it through a macro lens. It's all good. It's going to come back to micro. Don't worry about it. You basically say that individuals' expectations regarding future prices are based on what they observe today. And I think there's actually a really good quote of this, by the way. Oh, wrong extract. Hold on. Let me share it again. Okay, right. Where is it? It definitely says it somewhere here. I'm so sure. It's going to annoy me because I know it definitely says it. Oh, here. It's in the last paragraph. That's why. If prices are falling, consumers could postpone spending in anticipation of getting a better deal tomorrow and instead save more. There you go. That's a great quote, by the way. Yeah. Because this you basically explaining that they're delaying consumption, especially in what we call big ticket items, like a big purchase, like a car. Yeah. And then we draw our diagram. AR and MR is going to shift inwards now. Let's draw it. I know we've drawn this a few times now, by the way. We're near the end. Yeah. So I will stop boring you guys with these diagrams, but they're very important. Okay. Right. Oh, where's pen? We need more Lucozade, guys. We need more Lucozade. Right. So quantity, cost slash revenue. Right. Imagine how funny it is if the extract on Thursday is about Lucozade. That would be jokes. Right. MC. Let's talk about how expert tuition is like the main source of advertising for Lucozade. Right. Here's AR1 equals D1, and this is MR1. Okay. Q1, P1, and then we're going to have the costs over here somewhere. AC, C1, A, B. Okay, AR and MR shifting inwards. Here we go. Here we go. Yeah, in honor of Fabrizio Romano. There we go. Here we go. MR2. You can tell I'm getting tired. I'm just honestly spouting absolute nonsense now. Here's Q2, and then we go up to the demand. Oh, mine's so ugly. Oh, that is horrible. So I did not mean that. Here's P2. My cost is literally like, I mean, don't do that in the exam. C2, ugh. The supernormal profits are teeny tiny right now, yeah? Sorry, I drew it terribly. I drew it way better earlier in the course. Anyways, in a nutshell, yeah? You have a lot to say. BMW are now going to have to charge a a lower price. Their prices fall from P1 to P2. Their sales are going to fall from Q1 to Q2. Now you could talk about the fact that because they're a smaller firm, they cannot tap into the same extent of economies of scale as they could before. You can give an example. Do you guys agree if they're selling fewer cars? That means that they cannot bulk buy steel and cobalt and I don't know, whatever else in as much quantity as they could before. Their cost per unit therefore goes up from C1 to C2. They move further away from the MES. They become less productively efficient. And then you could talk about profits going down. You could even say that for some firms, they could even shut down. Just be wary of time. Don't overkill. You've got a lot to say there. If you can write as much of that as you can in the time, amazing, but do not go crazy on time. That's enough, yeah? Okay, that is incredible analysis, yeah? All right, let's deal with the evaluation because I think there is genius evaluation. Let me unshare this and show you guys the extract. Remember how I said there are clues in extracts, yeah? There are clues in other questions, basically. And there are two clues here. Clue number one is the five marker. The five marker is explain the difference between good deflation and bad deflation, which I will in a second. And the second clue is the question that I began with on purpose, the eight marker. Yeah. Where we go, hey, oil prices are going down. Now, what is good deflation? Good deflation, sorry, that's not bad deflation. Bad deflation is where aggregate demand is shifting inwards because people are just postponing consumption and AD shifts in and the negative spiral that I spoke about earlier, right? What's good deflation? Good deflation is where SRAS is shifting outwards. And therefore, that it causes, yes, deflation, but it also results in higher levels of economic growth. Now, based on what we did in extract, in the eight marker, we can make the case that it's good deflation. Because if it's oil prices that are causing prices to fall, do we agree that oil is a major cost of production for car manufacturing firms like BMW? And if that is the case, their variable costs are going down. It's amazing for them. It's not bad. So let's start there, yeah? And we can draw a diagram again for just for joke's sake. Can we do it one more time? Yeah, I know I've drawn this a million times, yeah? Actually, should I draw it? You know what? Let's just draw it really quickly. Quantity, cost slash revenue. If you've got the time in the exam, you draw it, by the way. If you're running out of time, you could just do it in words, yeah? There isn't a need for you to draw this. Like you can explain it in words. MC1. No, I'm going to do it really rough. AR equals T. That's MR. That's Q1. That's P1. All right, that's the cost going. That is the most disgusting deformed AC curve. But I think we've drawn this about 1,000 times. You guys are probably bored of drawing this now. And then we said variable costs are going down. This is MC2. Q2, P2, okay, and then there we go. Yeah. So as you guys can see, by the way, they are still charging a lower price, but now it's a lot better for them because they're actually generating more profit. Yeah. Okay, that is already wow, very nice. And this is where we now do the mic drop. Are you ready for the mic drop? Why do you think I chose a car manufacturing firm on purpose? And did you guys notice that I purposely chose a car manufacturing firm that is not known for electric cars, it is known for petrol cars? Because if oil prices are going down, oil and cars are complementary goods and they have a negative XCD. And therefore, if the price of oil is falling, it is amazing for car manufacturing firms because not only is their variable cost going down, the fact that they are complementary goods means that a reduction in the price of oil, petrol, results in an increase in demand for BMW. They're loving life, yeah? That is sensational evaluation. That's not even good. That is evaluation that is worthy of like, honestly, they should frame it and put it in like in a gallery, yeah? Does that make sense? And that is how you answer it. Make sense? That is the question. I'm nearly done, right? We're almost done. I was aiming to try and do 3 hours. I will try and do 3 hours for you guys just because you have your exam on Thursday and you can hopefully use this to revise and get amazing grades. Um, can I just talk about a topic that hasn't come up in a long, long time? And I will do maybe one more 25 marker and then we'll call it quits. Um, a topic that I think they haven't really asked about in the new spec in any meaningful way, but is a pretty big topic, is government failure. And so I just want to make sure that you guys know how to answer a question on government failure as probably a 12 marker. I think that's more likely to be the case, yeah? So potential question could be this. Assess possible reasons why government intervention in the tobacco market may lead to government failure. This is actually based, by the way, on the June 2014 paper, Unit 1, question 10A. I'll show you the paper in a second, yeah? But in a nutshell, we need to understand why government intervention in a market like tobacco could result in government failure. Okay, what is government failure? Well, government failure is where the government intervene to try and correct a market failure, but they make the situation worse. The fancy definition, by the way, is this. Government failure is where government intervention results in a net welfare loss compared to the free market solution. Okay, that's the fancy way of describing government failure. Okay, there are two go-to points. There is a third, but there's two excellent points that I need you guys to know. Number one, the first thing that to say that it's government failure is that taxes, like on tobacco, are likely to encourage people to turn to the hidden economy. Yeah? What is the hidden economy? It's basically where you can say the black market, but it's like meant to be politically incorrect and they might get upset. So do the hidden economy, you can also call it the shadow market. Sounds quite cool. Yeah. So the hidden economy is like, how people basically like share passwords for my online courses. I see you. I know who you are. Stop it. Yeah. But anyways, right. The hidden economy is where activity is taking place that is illegal, basically. So in this case, illegally smuggled cigarettes. Okay, why is that a problem? There are two problems. In fact, you know what? It's easier for me to show it to you from the data because you will have data if they ask about government failure. And so you need to be able to spot it in data. Unit 1, June 2014. Let's go and have fun. Unit 1, June 2014. Right, Lucas 8 time. Right. Here's a question. So 14 marker for you guys will be a 12 marker for paper 3. Yeah. And it says this with reference information provided and your own knowledge, lots of knowledge. To what extent might regulations on the sale of cigarettes and high taxes on tobacco result in government failure? Right. I said the first point is that it may encourage people to switch to the hidden economy. Yeah. Now, there are two reasons why that's problematic. The first is, do you guys agree the government lose out on a lot of tax revenue? And that tax revenue could have potentially gone towards paying for like NHS treatment for people who are smoking. Yeah. It says in the data exactly how much they lose. They lose, I think, 2 billion a year, something like that. There we go. Yeah. It goes. Around 20% of all tobacco smoked in the UK is smuggled into the country, and the government loses more than 2 billion a year in potential tax revenue. High tobacco taxes are blamed, by the way, for creating the illegal trade. Yeah. So the first problem is the government lose out on potential tax revenue. That's one problem in that paragraph. To add a bit of depth to that paragraph, you can also say that the products that are coming in that people are then smoking, they're unregulated. And therefore, they may contain even more harmful chemical compounds. They might be even worse than a standard cigarette. Therefore, it is government failure. Government intervention is basically forcing people or encouraging people to switch to the hidden economy. And so they're consuming cigarettes that are even worse for them. This is bad. This is government failure. That's our first analysis. I want two analysis for a question like that because it said fact reasons. Yes, you have to do two, and then one evaluation. Second analysis, always, always, always. Indirect taxes are always regressive. What does that mean? It means that it will impact low-income households more than it impacts high-income households. Do you guys agree that a tax on cigarettes of, let's say, £5 is nothing for a multimillionaire, but £5 is a very large proportion of someone's income if they are on minimum wage? In other words, it's going to widen income inequality. And then again, I need you guys to be able to spot things in the data to try and give yourself application. It's still theoretically valid, and you get all the points by explaining it, by the way. But look at this. It says in extract 2, tobacco smoking also remains much higher for low-income workers in manual occupations compared to higher income workers in professional manager. In other words, more low-income households are addicted to smoking compared to high-income households. So it's going to widen income inequality even more. They're addicted. They're so addicted. Yeah. My favorite part of this is absolutely mental. It goes, 11 to 15-year-old children, like are regular smokers. What the 11-year-olds? If you're smoking at the age of 11, sort yourself out. Stop it. Yeah. Even 15. Stop it. Stop it. Yeah. Anyways, but point is that you can go, hey, it's regressive. It's going to widen income inequality, and therefore it constitutes government failure. Yeah. All right. The evaluation to government failure questions that I want you guys to do is to defend the government. Now, before you evaluate, there was a third analysis that you could also do, which is called unintended consequences. Unintended consequences are where the government are doing something, but it creates another problem. So there are two unintended consequences in this particular extract. One is that they spoke about how they were going to get companies to have their packaging will be like really basic and plain. Yeah. The reason is that the packaging was meant to be like, attracting people, like, like vapes, they're packaged in a way where it's clearly trying to attract and get young kids to basically vape, which is really immoral and stupid, right? But the problem with them having plain packaging is that it would make it far easier to have counterfeit cigarettes. Yeah, it's like this. Yeah, this. Yeah, this government plans to force tobacco companies to use plain packaging may make it easier to produce counterfeit cigarettes. So the government, that's an unintended consequence. Yeah. Last one is this. It also says this, that the smoking ban led to 1,500 pubs and bars closing down each year. That's an unintended consequence as well. Yeah. All right. We're nearly done. I promise I will let you guys go to sleep and enjoy your life. Yeah. The very final thing that I want to just talk about is how you evaluate. And the way that you evaluate is that you evaluate by defending the government's position. And there are two things to say here. One, if we look at figure two, it shows the estimated cost of tobacco smoking in Great Britain. £13.7 billion. What is that £13.7 billion? That is the external cost. In other words, there is an absolutely almighty, massive market failure here. Should they just leave it and be like, it's fine, let's leave it to the free market? Obviously not. They need to intervene and need to tax this good to try and fix the market failure. So you're going to go, hey, one, it is necessary to intervene here because of how big the market failure is. And two, the intervention is clearly working. Because if you look at figure one, the percentage of adults that smoke in Great Britain has fallen from 1974 to 2010 from 45% to 20%. There you go. Lovely. Makes sense, yeah? So what that means is it's working. You go, hey, the tax is internalizing the external cost associated with tobacco smoking, and they need to do this because of the fact that the external cost is massive. Clear? All right. The very last thing, by the way, is I think the worst question they could ever ask is micro and macroeconomic effects of market failure in the financial sector. And the reason I haven't gone through this, I think I have gone through it in previous lives. And if you go and look at the timestamps, it's worth potentially looking at like me explaining the market, the financial crash to have an understanding of it. But the reason why I don't go through it is because every year before the exam, we will post it on our social media. I like the essay written out. To be clear, the essay that I post is written by myself, but it has way more points than I ever expect you guys to do. It's just to give you options of different points that you could use in the event that they ask a question like that. I doubt it, but famous last words. Someone's gonna come back to this video on Thursday and be like, you said you doubt it, but it came up. But anyways, just in the event that it does, I will post the essay on there. Um, just a couple of things before I let you guys go. I really thank you very, very much for all of you who are sending messages in. I really apologize because I am normally tutoring from 9 a.m. in the morning up till about 10 p.m. It's why I do these sessions on a Friday because it's one of the only days that I'm not tutoring. I try my best to respond to you guys as quickly as I possibly can. I try my best to help you guys as much as I can, but I am one person trying to do that. I hope that you guys have found these sessions to be helpful. I really, really, really hope you guys are feeling really confident going into the last exam. I think genuinely this is the easiest exam. Hopefully, I know that people are probably worried because there was not too much Theme 3 and Theme 4 in papers 1 and 2, in which case maybe it's going to be quite heavy in Thursday, but who cares? You're ready. It doesn't matter what they ask. You guys are ready to answer anything that they can ask you, yeah? The 25 marker, try to choose the option that you know you can develop in the most detail. Be very, very disciplined in your timing. I can't emphasize enough the importance of getting really good at 5, 8, and 12 markers within the time limits, especially the 5s and the 8s. The 5 markers do not exceed 5 minutes. The 8 markers do not exceed 8 minutes, no matter what happens. If you are in a position where you're taking longer in an 8 marker than 8 minutes, just leave it. Accept it. It's okay. Your mark is not going to be determined by you getting 8 out of 8. It is determined by you getting as many of the 25 marks as possible in that particular extract. Other than that, you guys are going to smash it. Honestly, you're going to do really, really well. Please revise off the videos that I put out for you guys. Realistically, this probably is the last video that I put out ahead of your exam, partly because I actually think that I don't want to give you guys excessive amounts to like use. This is really useful, yeah? If I start posting loads, we have a couple of videos coming out like on social media, but in terms of YouTube's, I've put out some really important stuff that you can use to revise. This is the main source of revision, yeah? This is where hopefully you guys can come back to and revise and go over it. I don't know who's going to do it, but one of you amongst you is a legend, and we'll do the timestamps. I honestly appreciate it so much. Every time someone does it after a live, I'm enormously grateful to you. Yeah. All right, guys, go smash it. Go drink loads of Lucozade and like just spread your wings and smash your exams. I'll see you guys very, very soon.